Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, I thought it would be a nice idea if you can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I moved into a new house in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio a few months ago. It was the kind of place where nothing much happened. Neighbors waved but kept to themselves, and everything was pretty peaceful. I liked that. After years of city noise, it was nice to finally have some quiet. Things started to feel off when the house next door sold. A man moved in, probably in his late 40s. I noticed him right away because he never seemed to leave his house. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he worked from home or had some sort of night job. But then, I started noticing him at odd times, staring out his windows, looking directly at my house. It was hard to ignore. Every time I went outside, he was there, just watching. Sometimes he'd be in his front window, other times in the back. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't know what to do. It wasn't exactly a crime to look out your window, and I didn't want to be the weird new neighbor making a fuss over nothing. One evening, I was sitting in my living room when I felt that creeping sensation you get when someone's watching you. I glanced out my window and saw him again, standing in his upstairs window, looking right at me. His face was partly hidden behind the curtain, but I could see his eyes following me as I moved around the room. I decided to confront him. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I was tired of feeling uneasy in my own home. The next day, I walked over and knocked on his door. He answered quickly, almost like he'd been expecting me. Up close, he looked different, pale, with dark circles under his eyes, and he had this unsettling smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. I asked him if he'd been watching me. He denied it right away, said he didn't know what I was talking about. His voice was calm, too calm. I felt like I was the one in the wrong, like I'd imagined the whole thing. I wanted to believe him, so I let it go and walked back home, but the feeling that something wasn't right stuck with me. That night, I locked all my doors and windows, double-checking everything. I even put a chair under the doorknob to my bedroom. I didn't know why I was so paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the house. I must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing I remember is waking up suddenly, my heart racing. It was pitch black, and the house was silent, but I felt it again, that feeling of being watched. I lay there, barely breathing, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But then I heard it, a soft creak, like someone was trying to be quiet, stepping carefully across the floor. I couldn't move. I was frozen in my bed, my mind racing with thoughts of what could be happening. I wanted to reach for my phone, but it was on the nightstand, and I didn't want to make any noise. I just lay there, listening, waiting for something to happen. The creaking got closer, stopping just outside my bedroom door. The knob turned slowly. I could see it moving in the dim light coming through the curtains. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The door didn't open, though. Whoever it was just stood there, holding the knob, like they were deciding whether or not to come in. I don't know how long I lay there, but eventually, the knob turned back, and I heard the creaking footsteps retreating down the hall. I stayed in bed until the sun came up, too scared to move. When it was finally light enough, I got up and checked the house. Nothing was out of place, and all the doors and windows were still locked. I tried to tell myself it was a dream, but I knew it wasn't. I knew someone had been in my house, and I knew who it was. I didn't go over there again. Instead, I started looking for another place to live. I couldn't stay there, not knowing what he might do next. Before I could move out, though, it happened again. This time, I was prepared. I had my phone in bed with me, and when I heard the creaking, I hit record. The knob turned again, just like before, but this time, I could hear him breathing, this slow, deliberate breath just outside my door. I stayed completely still, not wanting to make a sound. After what felt like forever, the footsteps retreated again. I waited until I was sure he was gone, then I got up, grabbed my keys, and left the house. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I drove to a hotel and didn't look back. The next day, I went to the police. I showed them the recording, but without any proof that he'd actually been inside, there wasn't much they could do. They said they'd talk to him, but I didn't stick around to find out what happened. I moved out that same week, breaking my lease. It cost me a lot of money, but I didn't care. I couldn't live there, not knowing what might happen next. I found a new place across town and tried to put the whole thing behind me. But even now, in my new house, I find myself checking the locks more often than I should. I keep my phone close at night, and I never open the curtains after dark. I haven't seen him since I moved, but sometimes, I still feel like I'm being watched. I was driving home late one night, taking the back roads like I always did to avoid the traffic. It was pitch black out there, the kind of darkness that feels heavy, like it's pressing in on you from all sides. The road was empty, just me and the stretch of asphalt cutting through the woods. I was tired, more tired than I should have been, and I was thinking about how I couldn't wait to get home, crawl into bed, and forget the long day I'd had. Out of nowhere, I saw flashing lights in my rearview mirror. Red and blue, like a cop car. My first thought was that I must have been speeding, though I couldn't remember pushing the gas any harder than usual. I slowed down and pulled over, trying to remember if I'd seen a speed limit sign, but everything was a blur. I sat there for a second, watching in the mirror as the car pulled up behind me. Something about it didn't look right. The lights were there, but the car itself was all wrong. It wasn't a police cruiser, not the kind you'd expect. It was an old, beat-up sedan, the kind you see in junkyards, not patrolling the streets. My heart started to race a bit, and I had this creeping feeling in my gut that something was off. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was an unmarked car, something the state troopers used. I mean, I'd heard of that before. But still, the feeling wouldn't go away. I kept my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the car in the mirror. The door opened, and a man got out. He was wearing dark clothes, but no uniform. No badge, nothing that looked official. He walked up slowly, almost too slow, like he was sizing me up with every step. When he got to my window, I rolled it down just a crack, enough to hear him but not enough to let him reach inside. He leaned in close, too close, and I could smell his breath stale, like cigarettes and something sour. He didn't look like any cop I'd ever seen. His eyes were cold, the kind that made your skin crawl, and his smile was all wrong, more like a sneer. He didn't ask for my license or registration, didn't say anything about why he'd pulled me over. Instead, he just stared at me, his eyes never leaving mine. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy, and I felt like I was trapped in that car, like the air was getting thinner. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough. He asked me where I was headed, but the way he said it made it clear he didn't care about the answer. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, to get out of there before something bad happened. I lied and told him I was just heading home, that I lived nearby, hoping that would make him back off. But he didn't. He just stood there, like he was trying to decide what to do next. I kept my hand on the door handle, ready to lock it if he tried anything, my other hand gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Then, without warning, he reached for the door. My heart jumped into my throat. I slammed the lock down and backed away as far as I could in the driver's seat. He pulled on the handle, hard, yanking at the door like he was trying to rip it open. I saw the look in his eyes change, from cold and calculating to something darker, something dangerous. He knew I was scared, and he liked it. I realized then that he wasn't a cop, not even close. He was just some guy, someone who decided to use those fake lights to trick people into stopping. And I was his target. I didn't wait to see what he'd do next. I jammed the key into the ignition, my hand shaking so bad I almost dropped it. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires squealing as I sped away. He didn't follow me at first, just stood there in the road, watching me go. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw him running back to his car. The lights came on again, but this time I didn't slow down. I pushed the pedal to the floor, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The road twisted and turned, and I could see his headlights in the distance, growing closer with every second. I knew I couldn't outrun him forever. The road was too long, too empty, and he was too determined. But I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know these roads well enough to find a safe place to turn off, and I couldn't risk stopping. So I kept going, the car shaking as I pushed it harder than it was meant to go. Then, up ahead, I saw a side road, barely more than a dirt path leading into the woods. I didn't have time to think, didn't have time to plan. I yanked the wheel to the right, my car skidding as I turned onto the path. I turned off my lights, hoping it would make me harder to see. The car bounced and jolted over the rough ground, branches scraping against the windows as I tore through the trees. I couldn't see his headlights anymore, but I didn't stop. I kept going, deeper into the woods, until the path ended in a small clearing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel steady, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I killed the engine and sat there, my heart pounding in my ears, waiting, listening. The only sound was the wind in the trees and the ticking of the cooling engine. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly, in case he was still out there, looking for me. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, the tension started to drain away. I hadn't seen any lights, hadn't heard any cars. Maybe he'd lost me, or maybe he'd given up. When I finally felt like it was safe, I turned the car around and crept back to the main road, driving with the lights off until I was sure I was far enough away. I didn't see him again, but the whole drive home, I kept checking the mirror, half expecting to see those lights flashing behind me again. When I got home, I parked in the garage and locked the door behind me, checking it twice before I let myself relax. I sat in the car for a long time, my hands still shaking, my mind racing with what could have happened. I didn't call the cops. What would I say? That some guy with fake lights tried to pull me over in the middle of nowhere? I wasn't sure they'd believe me, and I didn't want to think about it anymore. I had always loved camping alone. The solitude and peace of being out in nature helped me unwind after long weeks of work. So, when I found this remote spot in Colorado, I was excited. It was far from the nearest town, deep in the woods and perfect for a weekend away from everything. I arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon, set up my tent, and made a small fire to cook some dinner. As night fell, the forest became eerily quiet, the kind of quiet where every little sound feels amplified. I tried to ignore the growing unease in my gut and focused on enjoying my evening. Around midnight, I was just about to crawl into my sleeping bag when I heard something. It was a faint noise, like footsteps crunching on leaves. I thought maybe it was an animal or just the wind. But then I heard it again, a bit louder this time, and it made me sit up straight. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the noise kept coming. It felt like it was getting closer, and I could hear whispers now. I unzipped the tent quietly, poked my head out, and immediately noticed that something was wrong. My car, which had been parked a little way off, was sitting at an odd angle, and the headlights were off. I couldn't see the exact details from where I was, but it looked like someone had tampered with it. I grabbed a flashlight and quietly unzipped the tent. My heart was pounding. I needed to see what was going on. I crept out and shone the light towards my car. The front tire was slashed, and the windshield was cracked. I was about to panic when I heard more voices, this time much closer. I crouched down, trying to keep out of sight. I looked around and saw shapes moving near the perimeter of my campsite. There were people, at least 3 or 4, and they were making their way towards me. They were talking in low, urgent tones, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. My stomach dropped. I realized they must have seen me get out of the tent and were now surrounding my campsite. I quickly darted back to the tent, trying to think of what to do. My phone was in my car, and with the tires slashed, I couldn't drive away. I needed to figure out a way to get out of there without them noticing me. I took a deep breath and quietly unzipped the tent just enough to see out. One of the figures moved closer, shining a flashlight around. My breath caught in my throat. I was terrified they would find me. I kept as still as possible, trying to keep my movements minimal. The voices grew louder, and I could hear them discussing plans, mentioning something about finishing the job. I couldn't understand all the words, but I knew it wasn't good. I had to get out, and fast. I glanced around the campsite, looking for anything I could use. The only option I could see was to head into the woods, but I didn't know the area and it was pitch dark. Then, I heard one of them say something about checking the tent. I had to act quickly. I grabbed my flashlight, took one last deep breath, and quietly crawled out of the tent. I moved to the edge of the clearing, hoping the darkness would conceal me. I heard footsteps approaching the tent, and I knew they were getting close. I slipped through the trees, moving as silently as I could. The branches scraped against my arms, and I had to keep my flashlight off to avoid being seen. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan. I could still hear their voices in the distance, growing fainter as I moved further away. After what felt like an eternity, I found a small clearing with some heavy underbrush. I crouched down and tried to calm my breathing. I had no idea where I was or how far I had gone, but I knew I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving until I was sure they weren't following me. I waited there for a while, listening for any sign of movement. When I felt reasonably sure they weren't nearby, I started making my way back towards the road. I kept my pace slow and careful, avoiding any noise that might give me away. The fear I felt was overwhelming, and every snap of a twig made me jump. Eventually, after what seemed like hours, I reached the road. I had no idea how far I had to walk to find help, but I had to try. I started walking, hoping to come across a passing car or someone who could help me. The adrenaline kept me going, and I pushed through the exhaustion. It wasn't until the first light of dawn that I finally saw a car coming down the road. I flagged it down, and the driver stopped, looking concerned. I explained as best as I could, my voice shaking. They let me use their phone, and I called the police. When the authorities arrived, they went back to the campsite with me, but by then, the people were gone. My car was still disabled, but the immediate danger had passed. The police took a report and promised to investigate further, but they didn't hold out much hope of catching the intruders. I spent the rest of the day with the police, giving them every detail I could remember. They assured me they would keep an eye out for anything suspicious in the area. I was shaken but relieved that I had managed to escape. I don't think I'll ever go camping alone in such a remote area again. The fear and anxiety of that night have stayed with me, and I've learned to be much more cautious about where I choose to camp. It's a hard lesson, but one I'll never forget. I lived in a small apartment complex in Denver, a place I'd always found quiet and safe. It was a decent neighborhood, not too busy but not too isolated either. I enjoyed the peace and the security of knowing my neighbors. At least, that's what I thought. One evening, I came home from work to find the building buzzing with activity. There were a few police cars outside and some neighbors standing around, talking in low, worried voices. I overheard someone mention a break-in. Apparently, someone had broken into one of the vacant units in our building. I didn't think much of it at the time. These things happened, I told myself. A few days later, I started noticing some odd things. My mail seemed to be slightly rearranged, and I found a couple of my packages open when I went to check them. I figured maybe it was just a mistake or some kind of mix-up. I didn't think it was related to the break-in, but the feeling of unease grew. One night, I was watching TV when I heard a faint noise coming from the apartment next door. I knew the place had been empty since before I moved in, so the sound puzzled me. It was like someone moving around quietly, but I couldn't be sure. I shrugged it off and went to bed. The next day, I got home and noticed a strange smell coming from the hallway. It wasn't overwhelming, but definitely noticeable. It smelled like something had been left out and was beginning to rot. I called the building manager to report it, and they said they'd check it out. Over the next few weeks, the smell didn't go away, and the noise from the empty apartment seemed to get more frequent. It was a soft shuffling, almost like footsteps, but very faint. I began to wonder if the break-in had somehow involved someone moving into that vacant unit. It was a disturbing thought, but I pushed it aside, trying to focus on my daily life. One evening, I came home to find the door to the vacant apartment ajar. My heart raced as I looked at it, but I decided to just call the building manager. I didn't want to get involved directly. The manager assured me that they'd take care of it, but the door remained open for days. I began to feel a constant sense of being watched. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. My neighbors seemed to be on edge too, but no one talked about it openly. It felt like we were all sensing something wrong, but were too afraid to address it. One night, I heard a loud crash coming from the direction of the vacant apartment. My pulse quickened, and I decided I had to find out what was happening. I went to the door of the empty unit, but it was locked. I tried knocking, but there was no response. The noise had stopped, and the place was silent again. I went back to my apartment, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me. As I lay in bed, I heard the noise again. It was like someone moving around in the empty apartment, but this time, it was closer. I could almost hear the whispers and shuffling right outside my door. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to call the police. I explained the situation, but they said they couldn't do much without a clear report of criminal activity. I felt helpless and frustrated. It was clear something was very wrong, but no one was able to help. The next morning, I woke up to find my apartment had been searched. Drawers were open, and things were out of place. The building manager was called again, and they finally took the situation seriously. They started an investigation, but I felt like the damage was already done. One night, I saw someone standing in the hallway outside my apartment. I was frozen with fear, but I managed to peek through the peephole. The figure was dressed in dark clothing, and I could see only part of their face. They seemed to be looking directly at my door. My heart raced as I quickly retreated to the back of my apartment, dialing 911. The police arrived quickly this time, and the figure was gone. They conducted a thorough search of the building. When they investigated the vacant apartment, they found evidence of someone living there. There were belongings and personal items scattered around, but the person had managed to slip away before they were caught. The police informed us that the intruder had been using the vacant apartment as a hideout, spying on residents and breaking into other units. They were skilled at staying hidden, which is why they had managed to evade capture for so long. They assured us that they were doing everything they could to catch the person, but for now, we were advised to be extra cautious. I had to move out of the apartment. The sense of violation and fear was too overwhelming to ignore. I found a new place and tried to rebuild some sense of normalcy. The experience left me deeply shaken. I learned to be more aware of my surroundings and to trust my instincts when something felt off. Even now, I find it hard to sleep without checking the locks multiple times. I try not to dwell on the thought of someone watching me, but it lingers. I had just finished a late shift at work in London and was exhausted. The city felt different at night, quieter but somehow more unsettling. I was relieved to see a taxi pull up when I called one. I climbed in, greeted the driver, and gave him my address. It was a short trip, and I was looking forward to getting home. The taxi ride started normally. We left the office and headed in the direction of my apartment. But after a few minutes, I noticed we were taking turns that didn't seem right. I checked my phone to see if we were on the right route, and I realized we weren't. My heart started to pound. I asked the driver, "Excuse me, why are we going this way?" "My place is the other direction." He glanced back at me in the rearview mirror but didn't say anything. The look in his eyes made me uneasy. It was a cold, calculating stare. I repeated my question, and he just mumbled something about a shortcut. I knew something was wrong. The streets were getting emptier and less familiar. We were moving faster now, and the driver wasn't responding to me at all. I reached for the door handle to open it, but it was locked. Panic set in. Why are the doors locked? I want to get out, I demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he just kept driving faster. The city lights blurred as we sped through deserted roads. I looked out the window and tried to figure out where we were. Nothing looked familiar. I felt a wave of fear wash over me. I knew I had to stay calm and find a way out of this. I tried to call the police, but the signal was weak. My hands were shaking as I tried to get through. The driver suddenly turned off the main road and onto a narrow, dark street. My panic escalated. I shouted at him to stop, but he ignored me. His focus was fixed straight ahead, his grip tight on the steering wheel. I could see a hint of a smile on his face through the rearview mirror. It was chilling. I spotted a red light ahead and hoped we might stop soon. Maybe I could make a break for it. But instead of slowing down, he sped up. The red light turned to green, and we continued down the dark street. I kept looking for any signs of people or buildings, anything that could help me. I saw a few houses in the distance, but it was too late. We were already deep into a remote area. My heart was racing, and I could barely think straight. I considered trying to kick out the windows, but I was afraid it wouldn't work. The driver suddenly turned into a secluded driveway with high fences on either side. He stopped the car and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel my breath quickening, and I tried to think of a plan. I shouted, "Let me out." "What do you want?" He turned around slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'm afraid we're not going to your place," he said calmly. His voice was cold and devoid of any emotion. He reached over and pulled out a phone, showing me a picture of my building from the street. "I know where you live. I don't want to take you there." I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was clear he had been watching me for a while. I tried the door again, but it was still locked. Desperation made me think of every possible way to escape. I noticed a small window in the back of the taxi, but it was too narrow to fit through. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do next. The driver got out of the car and walked around to the back. I watched through the window, trying to see if there was anything I could use to my advantage. He opened the trunk and began rummaging through it. While he was distracted, I tried the door again. I used all my strength, pulling and pushing, but it wouldn't budge. I heard him coming back and knew I had to act quickly. I grabbed my phone and tried to send a distress message, but it wasn't working. He got back in the car, holding something in his hand. I couldn't see what it was, but it made me more anxious. He got in and locked the doors again. I could see the malicious intent in his eyes as he started the engine. The fear I felt was overwhelming. I had to think of something fast. I remembered the emergency button in the taxi, the one meant for drivers in case of trouble. I reached for it and pressed it as hard as I could. The button was supposed to alert the authorities if something went wrong. As we drove further into the darkness, I could see flashing lights in the distance. The driver seemed to notice them too. His face changed from cold determination to panic. He made a sharp turn and started speeding away from the lights. I heard sirens closing in, and the driver started cursing under his breath. He was clearly frustrated and scared. He took one last desperate turn and pulled up to an abandoned building. He stopped the car and turned to me. "This is where you get out," he said with a twisted smile. I didn't wait for him to change his mind. I jumped out of the car and ran towards the flashing lights. I could hear him yelling behind me, but I didn't look back. I just kept running, hoping I was headed in the right direction. The police were quick to respond once they saw me. They took me to safety and quickly apprehended the driver. He was charged with multiple offenses, including attempted kidnapping. I was shaken but relieved that I had managed to escape. I was on a solo trip through the Australian outback, wanting to experience the isolation and vastness of it all. I'd always been drawn to the idea of getting away from it all, and the outback seemed like the perfect place. I had planned for a few weeks of solitude, with only my camping gear and a sense of adventure to keep me company. One evening, as I was setting up camp near a small, deserted stretch of road, a truck pulled up. The driver, a local man, got out and walked over. He looked friendly enough, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and dusty work clothes. He introduced himself as Jack and said he was on his way to a nearby town but wanted to check in on me, just in case I needed anything. At first, I thought it was nice of him. We chatted for a bit, and he offered to help me with some firewood. I accepted, thinking it would be good to have some company for a while. The sun was setting, and the temperature was dropping quickly, so having someone around seemed like a good idea. Jack stayed around as the fire got going, and we talked about the area. He seemed genuinely interested in my trip and asked a lot of questions about where I was going and what I planned to do. I answered as best as I could, enjoying the break from being alone. As the night went on, Jack's demeanor started to change. He became more intense and his questions more probing. It felt like he was digging into my personal life more than a casual conversation would warrant. I tried to brush it off, telling myself he was just a curious local. The situation took a turn when Jack started making comments about how dangerous the outback could be for someone alone. He talked about all sorts of hazards, wild animals, harsh weather, and how quickly someone could get lost. His tone was unsettling, though he kept smiling. I offered him some of my food and drinks, hoping to lighten the mood. But instead of accepting, he became increasingly aggressive. He started talking about how people often weren't prepared for the outback and that it was better to have someone who knew it well. His eyes never left me, and his smile felt forced. I began to feel uneasy. I told him I needed some time alone and that I was fine. Jack's reaction was immediate. He seemed annoyed and tried to convince me to let him stay a bit longer. He even suggested we could camp together, which made me uncomfortable. I firmly told him no, that I needed to rest and that he should go. Jack didn't leave right away. He lingered by the fire, pacing back and forth. I could see him occasionally glance at my gear and my tent. I watched him, trying to gauge his intentions. The more I observed, the more I realized he wasn't just a friendly local. There was something menacing about him. Eventually, Jack picked up his things and said he would be on his way. As he drove off, I felt a wave of relief, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I double-checked that my tent was secure and that all my belongings were in place. I locked my car and made sure my phone had signal, though I knew it was spotty in the outback. Around midnight, I heard noises outside my tent. I couldn't tell if it was an animal or someone moving around. My heart raced as I listened carefully, trying to discern the sounds. It was unsettling, but I convinced myself it was just the wind or wildlife. The noises continued, growing louder and closer. I grabbed a flashlight and unzipped the tent just a crack to look outside. I saw a figure moving around my camp. Jack's truck was parked not far from my sight. I froze, trying to control my breathing. I heard footsteps approaching, and I quickly zipped the tent shut. My mind raced as I tried to think of what to do. I didn't have much in terms of protection, and I was isolated with no immediate help available. I considered my options and knew I needed to stay quiet and calm. The footsteps stopped, but I could hear muffled voices. Jack was talking, but I couldn't make out the words. The fear in me grew as I realized he was likely not alone. My phone had a weak signal, but I tried calling the local authorities. The call failed, adding to my anxiety. The minutes felt like hours as I lay still in my tent. I heard more movement around my camp, and I could see shadows flickering through the thin fabric of the tent. The intruders were trying to find a way inside, and it was clear that Jack's visit had not been a friendly gesture. Suddenly, I heard the sound of my car door opening. I knew I had to act quickly. I grabbed a flare gun I had packed for emergencies and decided to make a break for it. I waited until the noise was close and then unzipped the tent just enough to slip out. I ran towards the direction where Jack's truck had been parked. I knew it was risky, but it was my only chance. The flare gun in my hand felt like a small comfort, though I hoped I wouldn't need to use it. As I moved quietly, I saw the truck's lights in the distance. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, trying to unlock it as quickly as I could. My hands were shaking, and it took a moment to get the door open. I jumped inside and started the engine, praying it would start quickly. The truck was still idling, and I could see the figures moving around the campsite. I backed out carefully, making sure not to draw attention. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the lights of the truck following me for a moment before they faded. I didn't stop until I reached a roadside rest area where I knew there would be other travelers. The police were notified when I reached the rest area, and they sent out a team to check the area where I had camped. They assured me that they would handle the situation and warned me to stay alert. It was a terrifying experience, and I realized how vulnerable I had been out there alone. Last Friday night, I had a really unsettling experience in my own city of Seattle. I was out with friends and decided to use a rideshare app to get home since it was late and I didn't want to risk walking alone. I'd been in a rush when I ordered the ride, not paying too much attention to the address details. The ride was uneventful, but when I got out of the car, I immediately knew something was wrong. I was at the wrong address. My apartment wasn't anywhere near where the driver had dropped me off. I double-checked the address on my phone, and sure enough, it was a few blocks away from where I stood. I tried to stay calm and started walking towards my apartment. The area was quiet, and it felt like I was the only one around. As I walked, I noticed a group of men standing on the corner of the street. They looked like they were hanging out, but their attention seemed to shift toward me as I passed by. They didn't say anything, just watched me. At first, I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. It was late, and I was alone, so my nerves were on edge. I picked up my pace, hoping to get home quickly. The last thing I wanted was to be out in the dark, alone, in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. I glanced back and saw that the group of men had started following me. I quickened my pace, and so did they. I could hear their footsteps behind me, which made my heart race. I tried to stay composed and not let them see how scared I was. I turned onto a side street, hoping to lose them, but they followed. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way to get out of this situation. I knew I had to find a place where there were more people or somewhere safe. I spotted a small convenience store down the road. It was open, and the lights were on. I hurried towards it, hoping to blend in with the crowd inside. As I walked in, I could see the men stopping outside, looking at the store with confusion. They didn't enter. Inside, I tried to act casual, like I was just shopping. I grabbed a few items, hoping to buy some time and to make it seem like I was just passing through. The store clerk looked at me with concern, but I didn't want to alarm him. I kept my head down and paid for the items. After a few minutes, I felt safe enough to leave. I peeked outside and saw that the men were gone. I took a deep breath and walked briskly towards my apartment, staying alert the whole way. My phone buzzed with a notification from the rideshare app, reminding me to rate the driver. I was too shaken to even think about that. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door and checked all the windows to make sure they were secure. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I was relieved to be inside, away from the street and whatever might have happened if I hadn't found that store. The next day, I reported the issue to the rideshare company. They were apologetic and offered a refund, but it did little to ease my nerves. I also made sure to check the address more carefully in the future and be more aware of my surroundings, especially when using a rideshare service. I was working late at the office in Boston last Wednesday night. The project had a tight deadline, and I knew I was going to be there for hours. By the time I checked the clock, it was already past midnight. The office was quiet. The only sounds were the humming of the air conditioning and the occasional tapping of my keyboard. I'd been focused on my work when I noticed something odd. The security cameras on the office's monitoring system were off. At first, I thought it might be a glitch, but then I remembered the security protocol. The camera should always be on, especially at night. I tried calling the security office, but the line was dead. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off. Maybe it was just a technical problem. Still, the silence in the office was unsettling, and I had a bad feeling. I decided to check the security room to see if there was a problem. The security room was on the other side of the building, and the lights were off in the hallway as I walked. I had to use my phone's flashlight to see. When I reached the door to the security room, I noticed it was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and the room was empty. The monitors were dark, and the equipment was off. As I looked around, I heard a faint noise behind me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. I felt like someone was watching me. I checked the security room more thoroughly, but there was no sign of anyone having been there recently. The equipment seemed untouched, except for the power switches being off. I started heading back to my desk, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The building was too quiet. The hum of the air conditioning seemed louder, almost like it was trying to drown out other sounds. I walked faster, trying to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. I reached my desk and tried to focus on my work again, but my mind kept wandering. Every little sound made me jump. I decided to check the building's layout on my phone. Maybe if I knew the building better, I'd feel more at ease. As I scrolled through the building plans, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the floor above me. I knew I was the only person in the office. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, and they seemed to be heading in my direction. I tried to stay calm and reached for my phone to call the police, but there was no signal. I thought about hiding, but I was afraid to move. The footsteps got closer and closer, and then stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear anything else. I quietly got up from my desk and moved towards the exit. I hoped I could slip out before whoever was up there noticed me. I was nearly at the door when I heard a voice. It was low and muffled, but definitely not mine. I froze. The voice was coming from the stairs. I couldn't make out what was being said, but the tone was menacing. I thought about trying to sneak out the emergency exit, but I didn't know if the person would see me or hear the door. With my heart pounding, I crouched down behind a large filing cabinet near the exit. I could hear the footsteps again, moving down the stairs. They were getting closer. I tried to steady my breathing, hoping they wouldn't hear me. The door to the office area creaked open. I peered around the edge of the cabinet and saw a shadow move across the floor. It was a man, dressed in dark clothing, carrying a flashlight. He was scanning the room methodically. I knew I had to act fast. I waited until he was distracted by something on the far side of the room. Then I darted for the emergency exit, moving as quietly as I could. My hands were shaking as I pulled the door open and slipped outside. I ran to my car, not looking back. I drove straight to the nearest police station and reported what had happened. The officers came back to the office with me, but by then, the building was empty. They searched the place but didn't find anyone. I was shaken, but at least I was safe. They advised me to stay out of the office until they could investigate further. The next day, the security system was checked, and it turned out that someone had tampered with the cameras and equipment. The police never found the man I saw, but they assured me that they would continue looking into it. I haven't stayed late at the office since then. I still get anxious when I think about that night, and I make sure to always double-check the security systems whenever I'm in the building. I was driving home from a long day at work, heading back to my place in Tucson. The drive along that rural highway through Arizona was always a bit eerie, especially at night. The desert stretches out for miles, and the isolation can mess with your mind if you're not careful. Around midnight, I saw a hitchhiker on the side of the road. He looked like he'd been out there for a while, and I felt a pang of sympathy. I usually wouldn't stop, but something about the way he was standing there made me think he might be in trouble. I pulled over, and he got in without a word, just a nod of thanks. At first, he seemed normal enough. He had a weathered face and a bit of stubble, wearing a jacket that looked like it had seen better days. I offered him a bottle of water from the passenger seat, which he accepted with a grateful smile. We started talking to pass the time. He said his name was Jake and that he was trying to get to a town up ahead. I told him I was heading in that direction, so I could drop him off if he needed. He was friendly enough, chatting about the usual small talk, how long he'd been on the road, his plans for the future, that sort of thing. But as we drove deeper into the desert, his questions became more specific. He asked me about my job, where I lived, and how my family was. The questions seemed normal at first, but then he started asking about things only someone who knew a lot about me would ask. I mentioned that I had a dog, and he knew its name right away. I was surprised but didn't think much of it. Maybe he had seen a photo or something. Then he mentioned my car, saying he'd noticed a specific model and the small dent on the rear bumper, details I hadn't shared with him. The conversation started to feel unsettling. He knew details about my daily routine, things that made me realize he might have been watching me. He talked about my work schedule, my favorite coffee shop, and even mentioned that he had seen me there a few times. I tried to stay calm and steer the conversation back to safer topics. But every time I thought I deflected the creepiness, he'd bring up something else that made my skin crawl. He knew about the little things, like how I usually took the scenic route home because I liked the view of the mountains. The more he talked, the more I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been following me for a while. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, trying to gauge his intentions. His calm demeanor didn't match the unsettling things he was saying. I decided to take a detour to see if I could lose him. I turned off the main highway onto a smaller, less traveled road, hoping he'd think I was going a different way. I tried to act normal, like I was just taking a different route home. But Jake didn't seem bothered by the change in direction. He continued talking, almost as if he didn't notice we were off the main road. He even mentioned that he liked this route better because it was less busy, which only made me more anxious. I was getting desperate. I made a quick stop at a small roadside diner, hoping to get some help or at least buy some time. I pretended to pull over for a rest, but as soon as I got out, I called the police and explained the situation. They said they'd send someone to check it out. While I waited, I kept an eye on Jake. He stayed in the car, looking around like he was just enjoying the night. I felt a mix of fear and frustration, knowing that he was still so close. When the police arrived, I explained everything to them and pointed out Jake. The officers approached Jake and asked him to step out of the car. He was cooperative, but there was something cold in his eyes that made me shiver. They searched him in the car, but it didn't look like they found anything incriminating. After talking to Jake, the police came back to me. They said he was just a drifter and didn't have any outstanding warrants. They couldn't detain him without evidence of a crime. They advised me to be cautious and offered to escort me home if I wanted. I thanked them but decided to drive the rest of the way on my own. I felt safer with the police nearby, but I didn't want to linger. As I drove away from the diner, I glanced back and saw Jake still standing by the police car, watching me. I made it home without further incident, but I haven't stopped thinking about that night. I changed my routine, and I'm more careful about my personal information now. I've never picked up another hitchhiker since. I went camping to get away from everything. The rain started not long after I set up my tent. It was heavy and cold, but I didn't mind. I just wanted peace. My family had been fighting a lot, and I needed a break. I was sitting under the tarp I had set up, listening to the rain, when I saw her. She stumbled into my campsite, soaked and shivering. She looked terrified. "Please, help me," she said. I got up and helped her sit down under the tarp. "What happened?" I asked. She was shaking so much she could barely speak. "He's coming. He's after me," she said. "I need to hide." I didn't know who she was talking about, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I gave her my jacket and some water. "Just stay here," I said. "I'll keep watch." She nodded and tried to calm down. I went to the edge of the campsite and looked around. I couldn't see anyone, but the rain made it hard to see anything. After a while, I heard footsteps. Someone was coming. I turned off my flashlight and crouched down behind a tree. A man appeared, moving quickly through the rain. He was tall and had a mean look on his face. He was looking for someone, and I knew it was her. I stayed as still as I could, hoping he wouldn't see me. He walked right past me, towards the tent. I knew I had to do something. I picked up a rock and threw it into the bushes. It made a loud noise, and the man turned towards it. He walked over to where the noise came from, and I took my chance. I ran back to the girl and grabbed her hand. "We have to go, now," I whispered. She nodded, and we ran into the forest. The rain was pouring down, making it hard to see and hear anything. We ran for what felt like forever, but the man didn't follow us. We found a small cave and hid inside. "Who is he?" I asked. "Why is he after you?" She took a deep breath and told me her story. Her name was Emily. She had been living with her uncle after her parents died. Her uncle was a bad man, always angry and violent. She found out he was doing something illegal and tried to run away. That's when he started chasing her. "We need to go to the police," I said. She shook her head. "He has friends in the police. They won't help us." I didn't know what to do. We couldn't stay in the cave forever, but it wasn't safe to go back to the campsite. We waited until the rain slowed down a bit. Then we left the cave and started walking through the forest. I tried to keep us moving in the right direction, but it was hard to tell where we were going. We were both tired and scared. We heard a noise behind us. It was him. He had found us. We started running again, but he was faster. He caught up to us and grabbed Emily. She screamed, and I tried to help, but he pushed me away. He had a knife. He held it to her throat and told me to stay back. I could see the fear in her eyes. I had to do something. I picked up a stick and hit him as hard as I could. He dropped the knife and let go of Emily. We ran again, but he wasn't far behind. I could hear him shouting, getting closer. We reached a road and saw a car coming. I waved it down, and the driver stopped. "Please help us," I said. "He's trying to kill us." The driver let us in, and we sped off. We looked back and saw the man standing in the road, getting smaller and smaller as we drove away. We went to the nearest town and found a police station. This time, they believed us. They arrested Emily's uncle and his friends. Emily was safe, and I went back home. The rain started just after we set up camp. We were deep in the woods, far from anyone else. The sound of the rain on the tent was almost calming. Almost. We had planned this trip for months. A chance to disconnect, to get away from the city and its noise. But now, in the rain, everything felt different. The fire was hard to keep going, but we managed. Jenny and I sat close to it, trying to stay warm and dry. We laughed about the rain, joked about how nothing ever goes as planned. Then, we heard it. Voices. Faint at first, then louder. Men, and they didn't sound friendly. I motioned to Jenny to stay quiet. We listened, trying to make out what they were saying. The words were hard to hear over the rain, but I caught bits and pieces. Something about a deal, and making sure no one sees. My heart started to race. "Do you think they saw us?" Jenny whispered. I shook my head, but I wasn't sure. I didn't want to take any chances. "We need to stay quiet," I said. "And keep the fire low." We sat there, tense, listening. The voices grew closer, then faded again. I couldn't tell how many there were. 3, maybe 4. They sounded angry, arguing about something. We stayed as still as possible, hoping they would move on. Suddenly, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. It swept over the trees, then our tent. I grabbed Jenny's hand, and we ducked down, holding our breath. The light lingered for a moment, then moved on. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. The voices moved away, but I knew they weren't gone. "We need to get out of here," I whispered. "Now!" We packed quickly, trying to be as quiet as possible. Every sound seemed louder in the rain. We grabbed our backpacks and doused the fire, making sure it was out. Then we started moving, staying low and trying to avoid the flashlight beams. The rain made everything slippery. We stumbled through the mud, trying to keep our footing. The voices were getting louder again. They were close. Too close. I could see the beams of their flashlights cutting through the trees, searching. We hid behind a large rock, trying to catch our breath. I could hear the men talking. They were arguing again, but I couldn't make out the words. Then one of them shouted, and I heard a gunshot. Jenny stifled a scream, and I pulled her close, trying to keep her calm. "We have to keep moving," I whispered. Stay low and follow me. We crept through the woods, trying to stay out of sight. The rain was relentless, making it hard to see or hear anything. Every step felt like it could give us away. My mind was racing, trying to think of a way out. Then, we saw it. A cabin hidden among the trees. It looked abandoned, but it might be our only chance. We made our way to it, keeping low and moving as quickly as we could. The door was unlocked, and we slipped inside, closing it quietly behind us. The cabin was dark and musty. It didn't look like anyone had been there in a long time. We found a corner and huddled together, trying to stay warm and quiet. The rain pounded on the roof, masking our breathing. We heard the men outside, their voices angry and loud. They were close, but they didn't seem to know we were in the cabin. I held Jenny close, trying to think of what to do next. We couldn't stay here forever. Hours passed, but it felt like days. The men kept searching, their flashlights sweeping through the trees. We stayed as still as possible, hoping they would give up and leave. But they didn't. They were determined to find something or someone. Finally, the voices started to fade. The men were moving away, but I knew it might only be temporary. We had to get out of the woods, but we couldn't risk being seen. We waited, making sure they were really gone. When we couldn't hear them anymore, we crept out of the cabin. The rain had let up a bit, but it was still dark and muddy. We moved as quickly and quietly as we could, staying off the main paths and sticking to the underbrush. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like one of the men. But we kept moving, driven by fear and adrenaline. We had to get to safety to find help. Finally, we saw the lights of a ranger station in the distance. Relief washed over me, but I knew we weren't safe yet. We made our way to the station, trying to stay out of sight. When we reached it, we banged on the door, shouting for help. A ranger opened the door, and we stumbled inside, soaked and shaking. "There's men in the woods," I said, trying to catch my breath. "They have guns. They're looking for us." The ranger grabbed his radio and called for backup. "Stay here," he said. "We'll take care of it." We waited inside, our hearts still pounding. I could hear the rangers talking, their voices calm and professional. After what felt like an eternity, they came back. "It's over," the ranger said. "We found them. You're safe now." Paul, Dana, and I were camping deep in the woods. It had been raining all day, a steady, cold drizzle that soaked everything. We had set up our tents and tried to get a fire going, but the wood was too wet. As night fell, we decided we needed more dry wood. Paul volunteered to go look for some, taking a flashlight and his rain jacket. He promised he wouldn't go far. The rain picked up, turning into a heavy downpour. Dana and I stayed in our tent, talking and waiting for Paul. We didn't think much of the time passing until it had been over an hour. I checked my watch and frowned. It shouldn't have taken him that long. We started to get worried. "We should go look for him," Dana said. I agreed, and we grabbed our flashlights and rain gear. We left our tent, the cold rain instantly soaking through our clothes. The forest was dark and eerily quiet except for the sound of the rain. We called out for Paul as we walked, our voices swallowed by the rain. The beam from our flashlights cut through the darkness, but it was hard to see far. The forest seemed to close in around us. We walked in the direction Paul had gone, keeping an eye out for any sign of him. We found his flashlight first. It was lying in the mud, still on. I picked it up and showed it to Dana. She looked scared. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. We kept going, now calling out louder, our voices edged with panic. Then we saw something that made my blood run cold. There were drag marks in the mud, leading away from the trail. I pointed them out to Dana, and we followed them, our hearts pounding. The marks led to a small clearing. In the middle of the clearing, there was a large tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted. At the base of the tree, we found Paul's rain jacket, torn and muddy. There were also strange marks on the tree, like someone had scratched it deeply. "Paul!" Dana screamed, but there was no answer. We looked around, shining our flashlights in every direction. The rain was relentless, making it hard to see or hear anything. Then we found blood. It was mixed with the rainwater, forming dark streaks in the mud. My stomach turned, and I felt a wave of fear wash over me. Dana was crying, but we had to keep going. We followed the blood, our flashlights shaking in our hands. The trail led us to an old, abandoned cabin. The door was hanging off its hinges, and the windows were broken. It looked like no one had been there in years. We approached cautiously, our footsteps squelching in the mud. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty. There was a strong smell of decay. We moved our flashlights around, searching for any sign of Paul. In the corner, we found a pile of old clothes and blankets. Dana gasped and pointed. There was a hand sticking out from under the pile. We rushed over and started pulling the blankets away. It was Paul. He was unconscious, but he was alive. There were bruises on his face and arms, and his clothes were torn. We tried to wake him up, but he didn't respond. We heard a noise behind us. Turning quickly, we saw a shadow move across the doorway. Someone was outside, watching us. Dana and I froze, our hearts racing. I grabbed a piece of wood from the floor, ready to defend us. The shadow moved closer, and a man stepped into the cabin. He was tall and thin, with wild eyes and dirty clothes. He looked at us and smiled, a twisted, menacing smile. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. "We're leaving," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "We're taking our friend and leaving." The man laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "I don't think so," he said, stepping closer. I swung the piece of wood at him, but he was fast. He grabbed it and shoved me hard, sending me crashing into the wall. Dana screamed, and the man lunged at her. She tried to fight him off, but he was too strong. I struggled to my feet and tackled him, knocking him away from Dana. We wrestled on the floor, the rain pounding on the roof above us. I managed to grab a rock and hit him on the head. He grunted and fell back, dazed. "Help me with Paul," I shouted to Dana. We lifted Paul and dragged him out of the cabin. The man was starting to recover, and we didn't have much time. We stumbled through the rain, heading back towards our camp. We didn't stop until we reached our tent. We laid Paul down and checked his injuries. He was starting to come around, groaning in pain. I looked back towards the forest, but there was no sign of the man. We packed up quickly, not wanting to stay a moment longer. Paul was weak, but he could walk with our help. We made our way back to the car, the rain finally starting to let up. When we reached the car, we drove straight to the nearest town and went to the hospital. Paul was treated for his injuries, and we told the police everything that had happened. They searched the forest and found the cabin, but the man was gone. We were all shaken by the experience. I couldn't stop thinking about that man, and what he might have done if we hadn't found Paul in time. The forest, once a place of peace and beauty, now felt dangerous and haunted. I had always loved the outdoors, so I decided to start a business leading wilderness survival trips. This summer, I had a group of 8 tourists signed up for a week-long adventure in the remote woods. We were all set to spend a week hiking, camping, and learning survival skills. It was supposed to be an enriching experience for everyone. The first day went smoothly. The group was enthusiastic, and everyone was getting along well. We set up camp by a small clearing, and I went over the basics of fire making and shelter building. Everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, and I felt a sense of satisfaction seeing them excited to learn. On the second day, one of the tourists caught my attention. His name was Mark. He was very quiet and kept to himself. I noticed he seemed more interested in observing us than participating. At first, I thought he was just shy, but his behavior started to unsettle me as the days went by. Mark began to show up at odd times. He would disappear into the woods alone and return with strange items he wouldn't explain. When asked about it, he would brush off the questions with vague answers. His eyes had a coldness to them that I couldn't ignore. I started to worry, but I didn't want to alarm the other tourists. On the 4th day, things took a darker turn. While we were practicing tracking and foraging, Mark disappeared for a long period. When he finally returned, he looked disheveled and had blood on his clothes. I asked him if he was okay, and he claimed it was from a small animal he'd accidentally injured. I wasn't convinced, but I let it go, thinking it was just my paranoia. That night, while everyone was sleeping, I heard noises outside the tent. I unzipped it quietly and peeked out. I saw Mark walking around the perimeter of the camp with a flashlight, scanning the area in a methodical way. He wasn't looking for something, he was searching for something specific. The next morning, I confronted him about his behavior. He laughed it off and said he was just checking for wild animals. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. We continued with the trip, but the tension was palpable. Mark's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would stare at the others with an intensity that made everyone uncomfortable. I could sense that the group was starting to pick up on the unease, and I needed to keep everyone calm and focused. By the 6th day, we decided to go for a longer hike, hoping it would distract us from the growing discomfort. Mark was supposed to stay at camp, but he insisted on coming along. I hesitated but allowed him to join us, worried that confronting him might escalate things. During the hike, we stopped for lunch by a stream. Mark wandered off again, and I was growing increasingly concerned. I gathered everyone to make sure we stayed together and safe. As we ate, I noticed that Mark had a strange bulge under his jacket. When he went to the bathroom, I saw him placing something in his backpack, something metallic. After lunch, I decided to follow Mark discreetly. I trailed him through the woods, keeping out of sight. He eventually stopped at a secluded spot and took out what looked like a hunting knife and a rope. My heart sank as I realized he was preparing something sinister. It was becoming clear that he wasn't just a strange tourist, he was a threat. I knew I had to act quickly. I returned to the group and tried to keep my composure. I told them that we needed to head back to camp immediately and packed up our things as fast as possible. I didn't want to panic anyone, but I made sure to keep Mark in sight. When we got back to camp, I told everyone we were going to pack up and leave early due to unexpected changes in weather conditions. I started gathering our gear, trying to appear as calm as possible. Mark watched with a strange interest but said nothing. As we were packing, I noticed Mark trying to sneak away with his backpack. I confronted him and asked him where he was going. He claimed he was just going to get some fresh air, but his eyes betrayed his intentions. I decided to call for help, but our cell service was spotty. I used a satellite phone to contact local authorities and explained the situation. They advised me to keep Mark in sight and to stay with the group until help arrived. With a growing sense of dread, I kept everyone together and made sure we stayed in a safe area. Mark became increasingly agitated as the hours passed. He started making erratic movements and talking to himself. I could tell he was losing control. Finally, our rescue team arrived. They found Mark trying to sneak away from the camp. They took him into custody and assured us that we were safe. It was a relief, but I was still shaken. I didn't realize how close we had come to a terrible situation. The authorities later confirmed that Mark had been using the trip as a cover for hunting people. He had a history of violent behavior, and his plans were much more sinister than I had imagined. I felt a mix of relief and guilt, knowing that the trip had almost ended in disaster. The rest of the trip was subdued. We returned home, and everyone was safe. I made sure to follow up with the tourists to ensure they were okay. It was supposed to be the perfect summer vacation. My family and I had saved up for months to stay at this luxury resort. The place was beautiful, with pristine beaches, lush gardens, and every amenity you could imagine. We arrived on a sunny afternoon, and everything seemed perfect. The first couple of days were bliss. We swam in the pool, lounged on the beach, and enjoyed the all-inclusive meals. But on the third night, my husband, Mark, started feeling sick. He thought it was just something he ate, but by morning, he was much worse. I took him to the resort's clinic. The doctor there was calm, almost too calm, and gave him some pills. Mark slept most of the day, and I started to feel uneasy. That night, our kids, Emily and Jake, began to complain of stomach aches. Panic set in as they both got worse quickly. By the next morning, all three were too weak to leave the room. I called for a doctor again, but they were slow to respond. When they finally came, they just gave more pills and assured me it was a common bug. Something felt off. The staff's reassurances didn't match the severity of what was happening. I decided to skip the resort's meals and bought some groceries from a nearby store. I cooked in our small kitchen, hoping it would help, but there was no change. I spent the night watching over my family, unable to sleep. That's when I noticed a few staff members lingering outside our room, whispering to each other. The next day, I went to the front desk and demanded to speak with the manager. They gave me the runaround, saying he was busy. My frustration grew. I started to observe the staff more closely and noticed something strange. They seemed overly attentive, always watching us. My mind raced with possibilities. Why were they so interested in us? What was really happening? I decided to take matters into my own hands. I snuck out of the room and wandered around the resort, looking for answers. In the basement, I found a locked door with a keypad. I waited until a staff member approached and saw them enter the code. I memorized it and returned later when the coast was clear. Inside, I discovered a makeshift lab with medical equipment and files on various guests, including my family. My heart pounded as I read through the files. It looked like they had been experimenting with different drugs, testing their effects on guests. I took photos of the documents with my phone and hurried back to the room. I needed to get my family out of there. When I returned, 2 staff members were in our room, trying to give my family more pills. I confronted them, and they became aggressive, insisting it was for their own good. I managed to get them out of the room and locked the door behind them. I packed our bags quickly and helped my husband and kids out of bed. They were weak, but we needed to leave. I called for a taxi, but none were available. The resort staff had likely anticipated this. We had no choice but to walk to the nearest town, a few miles away. The journey was slow and agonizing. My family could barely walk, and I was terrified we wouldn't make it. We finally reached a small clinic in the town. The local doctor was shocked at their condition and admitted them immediately. He confirmed my suspicions. They had been poisoned. I showed him the photos I took, and he contacted the authorities. My family was treated and started to recover, but the memory of that place haunted us. The resort was shut down, and the staff involved were arrested. It turned out they had been part of a larger operation, testing drugs on unsuspecting guests. Our perfect vacation turned into a nightmare, but we were lucky to get out alive. I was in town for a business presentation and checked into a hotel near the conference center. The room seemed nice enough, and I started unpacking my things. I was a bit nervous about the presentation, so I decided to practice my speech in front of the mirror. As I was going through my notes, I noticed a small, blinking light in the corner of the room. At first, I thought it was a smoke detector or some kind of sensor. But then I realized it was coming from a tiny hole in the wall. I got closer and saw a small lens inside. It was a camera, and it was pointed directly at the bed. My heart started racing. Someone had been watching me. I felt exposed and violated. I tried to think logically about what to do next. I didn't want to stay in the room, but I also didn't want to make a scene without being sure. I took a deep breath and decided to call the front desk. I told them there was something wrong with my room and asked if someone could come up. A few minutes later, a man from maintenance knocked on the door. I showed him the camera, and he looked shocked. He said he would report it to the manager right away. The manager came up shortly after and apologized profusely. He said they had no idea how the camera got there and assured me they would investigate. He offered me a different room and some free meals as compensation. I didn't feel much better, but I didn't have a choice. I needed to stay for the presentation. I moved to the new room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I checked every corner, every vent, and every piece of furniture. I found nothing, but I still felt uneasy. I tried to focus on my presentation, but my mind kept drifting back to the camera. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump. I kept thinking about who could have put the camera there and why. I decided I had to do something more. I couldn't just let it go. In the morning, I went to the manager again. I demanded to know what they had found out. He said they were still investigating but hadn't discovered anything yet. He assured me they took my privacy seriously and were doing everything they could. I didn't believe him. I felt like they were just trying to cover it up. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went to the local police station and reported what I had found. They took my statement and said they would look into it. Back at the hotel, I felt even more paranoid. I knew someone was watching me, but I didn't know who or why. I stayed in my room as much as possible and avoided interacting with anyone. I kept my curtains closed and didn't use the hotel Wi-Fi. The next day, I had my presentation. It went well, but I could hardly concentrate. I kept looking at the audience, wondering if the person behind the camera was there, watching me. After it was over, I went straight back to my room. That evening, there was a knock on my door. It was the police. They said they had found something. They asked if they could come in and talk. I let them in, and they told me they had found more cameras in other rooms. It wasn't just me. There were at least 3 other rooms with hidden cameras. They said they were questioning the staff and reviewing security footage. They asked if I had noticed anyone suspicious. I hadn't. I felt a bit of relief knowing it wasn't just me, but I was still scared. I didn't feel safe in the hotel anymore. The police left, and I packed my things. I decided to check out and stay somewhere else. As I was leaving, the manager tried to apologize again, but I didn't want to hear it. I just wanted to get out of there. I found another hotel on the other side of town. It was smaller and less fancy, but I felt safer. I checked the room thoroughly before unpacking and didn't find anything suspicious. I finally felt like I could relax a bit. The police called me a few days later. They said they had arrested a member of the hotel staff. He had been planting the cameras and watching the footage. They found recordings of several guests, including me. I felt sick knowing someone had been spying on me like that. I thanked the police for their work and hung up. I still felt uneasy, but at least I knew the person behind it was caught. I finished my business trip and went home, but the experience stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and I was extra cautious whenever I stayed in a hotel after that. It was a terrifying experience, and it took me a long time to feel safe again. My car broke down in the middle of nowhere. The road was empty, and my phone had no signal. I tried to restart the engine, but it just wouldn't turn over. I got out and looked under the hood, but I didn't know what I was looking at. It was just a mess of metal and wires to me. I was starting to panic when I saw headlights approaching. I waved my arms, hoping they would stop. The car slowed down and pulled over. A man rolled down his window and asked if I needed help. I told him my car wouldn't start, and I needed a tow truck. He looked at my car and said he could give me a ride to the nearest town. I hesitated, but it was getting late, and I didn't want to be stranded all night. I thanked him and got in. He seemed friendly enough, middle-aged, with a kind smile. We drove for a few minutes in silence. Then he started asking me questions. Where was I from? What was I doing out here? I answered politely, but something about his tone made me uneasy. He was too interested, too eager to know everything about me. I noticed we were heading in the opposite direction of the nearest town. I told him he was going the wrong way. He glanced at me and smiled, but didn't turn around. He said he knew a shortcut. My stomach twisted. Something was off. I asked him again to turn around, but he ignored me. I reached for my phone, hoping to find a signal, but there was none. He noticed and chuckled, saying it was pointless out here. My heart was pounding. I had to get out of this car. I told him to stop and let me out. He just kept driving, his smile gone now, replaced with a cold, hard look. I grabbed the door handle, but it wouldn't open. Child locks. My panic rose. I was trapped. I started yelling at him, demanding he let me out. He laughed, a low, chilling sound. He said I wasn't going anywhere. I looked around the car, desperate for something to defend myself with. There was nothing. Just an old blanket on the back seat. We drove deeper into the woods, away from the main road. The trees closed in around us, blocking out the moonlight. It was dark, and I couldn't see a way out. He pulled the car over and turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. He turned to me, his eyes cold and empty. He said I was going to do exactly what he said, or things would get ugly. I was shaking, my mind racing for a way out. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a knife. My blood ran cold. He ordered me to get out of the car. I hesitated, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't bluffing. I opened the door and stepped out, my legs trembling. He got up too, holding the knife casually, like it was just an extension of his hand. He told me to start walking. I asked where, but he just pointed deeper into the woods. I started walking, my mind frantically searching for a way to escape. The underbrush was thick, and the trees loomed overhead, blocking out the stars. I heard him walking behind me, his footsteps crunching on the leaves. I needed to do something, anything. I stumbled over a root and fell, and in that moment, I made a decision. I grabbed a handful of dirt and leaves and threw it in his face. He yelled, stumbling back, and I ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I ran as fast as I could. Branches scratched my face, and my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. I could hear him behind me, cursing and crashing through the underbrush. I saw a light ahead, a small cabin in the woods. I sprinted towards it, praying someone was home. I pounded on the door, screaming for help. The door opened, and an old man stood there, a shotgun in his hands. He took one look at me and then passed me to the man chasing me. The old man raised his shotgun and fired a warning shot into the air. The man chasing me stopped, his face twisted in rage. He turned and fled back into the woods. The old man pulled me inside and locked the door. I collapsed on the floor, shaking and crying. He called the police, and they came and took my statement. They searched the woods but didn't find the man. I was driving alone on a long stretch of highway. The rain started coming down harder, making it difficult to see. The windshield wipers were going full speed, but it didn't seem to help much. The road was nearly deserted, and I felt a bit uneasy. It was the kind of night that made you wish you weren't alone. I saw a figure on the side of the road, drenched and holding out a thumb. Normally, I wouldn't pick up a hitchhiker, but the weather was awful, and I felt a pang of sympathy. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I asked. He smiled, his face partly hidden by the hood of his jacket. "Yes, please. It's miserable out here." He climbed in, bringing a wave of cold, wet air with him. I turned up the heat and started driving again. We exchanged small talk at first. His name was Mike. He seemed friendly enough, talking about the weather and his bad luck with his car breaking down. I felt more relaxed with him in the car, the company breaking the monotony of the drive. But as the rain got heavier, something in his demeanor changed. His responses became shorter, his tone more serious. I tried to keep the conversation going, but it felt forced. There was a tension in the air that I couldn't quite place. Suddenly, he reached over and locked the car doors. I glanced at him, my heart starting to race. Why did you do that? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. For safety, he replied, but there was something unsettling in his voice. He turned to face me, his eyes cold and calculating. Keep driving. Fear gripped me. What's going on? I demanded, my voice shaking. He pulled a knife from his jacket and held it up where I could see it. Just keep driving, he said calmly. And don't do anything stupid. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. The rain was pounding on the roof, the road a blur in the headlights. I had to stay calm, had to think. Where are we going? I asked, hoping to buy some time. There's a rest area a few miles up the road. Pull in there, he ordered. I nodded, trying to keep my breathing steady. The rest area wasn't far, and I had to find a way to escape before we got there. I kept glancing at the road, looking for any opportunity. The rain made it hard to see, but I noticed a small dirt road coming up on the right. Without warning, I yanked the wheel and turned onto the dirt road. The car skidded in the mud, and Mike cursed, grabbing the dashboard for support. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. I didn't answer. I just kept driving, the car bouncing and sliding on the rough road. I could hear him fumbling with the knife, trying to steady himself. The dirt road wound through the trees, and I hoped it would lead to somewhere safe. "Stop the car," he demanded, his voice full of anger. He lunged at me, and I swerved, trying to throw him off balance. The knife grazed my arm, and I cried out in pain. I slammed on the brakes, the car sliding to a stop. I grabbed my bleeding arm and looked at him. He was panting, the knife still in his hand. "Get out," he ordered, pointing the knife at me. I didn't move. "Please, just let me go," I pleaded. He shook his head. "Get out," he repeated, more forcefully. I slowly opened the door and stepped out into the rain. It was freezing, the water soaking through my clothes instantly. Mike got out on his side, keeping the knife pointed at me. "Walk," he said, nodding toward the trees. I started walking, my mind racing. The rain was so heavy I could barely see a few feet ahead. I had to find a way to escape, to get away from him. He was right behind me, the knife glinting in the dim light. We walked for what felt like hours, the mud sucking at my shoes, the rain relentless. My arm throbbed where he had cut me, and I was starting to feel dizzy. I had to do something, had to find a way to get away. Suddenly, I heard a noise, a rustling in the trees. I stopped, turning to look. Mike grabbed my arm, pulling me forward. "Keep moving," he snapped. But the noise came again, closer this time. It sounded like footsteps. I glanced around, trying to see through the rain. "Someone's coming," I said, hoping it was true. Mike looked around, his grip on my arm tightening. "Shut up," he hissed. The footsteps were getting closer, and I could see a light bobbing through the trees. Mike cursed, pulling me toward the car. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice panicked. I saw my chance. I twisted out of his grip and ran toward the light, screaming for help. "Help! Please, help me!" The light stopped, and I heard a voice call out. "Who's there?" Mike was right behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran as fast as I could, the mud and rain slowing me down. I could hear him cursing, struggling to keep up. I burst through the trees and saw a figure holding a flashlight. It was a man, a hunter by the looks of it. "Help me!" I cried, running toward him. He looked confused for a moment, then saw Mike coming after me. He raised the flashlight, shining it in Mike's face. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Mike stopped, the knife still in his hand. "Just a misunderstanding," he said, trying to sound calm. The hunter wasn't buying it. He raised his rifle, pointing it at Mike. "Drop the knife," he ordered. Mike hesitated, then dropped the knife in the mud. The hunter kept the rifle trained on him, his eyes narrowing. "You okay, miss?" he asked me. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you," I whispered. The hunter kept the rifle on Mike as he called the police. They arrived quickly, taking Mike into custody. I was safe, but I knew I would never forget that night, the terror and the rain. I would never pick up a hitchhiker again. Not even for $1 million. Megan and I were driving to a family reunion, and somehow we took a wrong turn. The GPS lost signal, and we found ourselves on a narrow, winding road surrounded by thick woods. It was getting dark, and we were completely lost. The car started making strange noises, and soon enough, it broke down. We pulled over near an old, run-down house that looked abandoned. I didn't want to leave the car, but we had no choice. There was no cell service to call for help, so we decided to check if anyone was in the house. We walked up to the front door and knocked. There was no answer. The windows were dark, and the place looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. I tried the door handle, and to my surprise, it opened. We stepped inside, calling out for anyone who might be there. The inside of the house was as creepy as the outside. Dust covered everything, and the air felt thick and musty. There were old, broken pieces of furniture and tattered curtains hanging from the windows. We called out again, but still, no answer. As we were about to leave, an old woman appeared at the top of the stairs. She looked frail and worn out. She said she lived there alone and rarely had visitors. Megan explained our situation, and the old woman offered to let us use her phone. We followed her into a dimly lit room. The phone looked ancient, but it had a dial tone. I started dialing for a tow truck, but the call wouldn't go through. The old woman said the phone lines were unreliable and suggested we stay the night until we could get help in the morning. Reluctantly, we agreed. She showed us to a room upstairs with 2 small beds. It was cold and smelled of mildew, but we were too tired to argue. We locked the door and tried to get some rest. Megan fell asleep quickly, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak. In the middle of the night, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They stopped right outside our door. My heart pounded in my chest. I got up quietly and peered through the keyhole. I saw the old woman standing there, just staring at our door. I woke Megan up and whispered what I saw. We decided to stay quiet and pretend to be asleep. After a while, the footsteps continued down the hall, and we heard a door creak open and shut. We stayed awake, too scared to move. At dawn, we decided to leave the house and walk back to the main road. As we were packing our things, we heard the old woman talking to someone downstairs. We peeked out and saw a man with a rough, menacing look. They were whispering, and it didn't seem friendly. We quietly slipped out of the room and made our way down the stairs. The floorboards creaked loudly, and the old woman and the man turned to look at us. Their expressions were cold and hostile. The man stepped towards us, and we bolted for the door. We ran through the woods, not knowing where we were going. We just needed to get away from that house. We could hear them shouting behind us, but we didn't stop. We stumbled through the underbrush, branches scratching our arms and faces. Eventually, we found a small clearing and stopped to catch our breath. We were completely lost, but we knew we couldn't go back. We kept moving, hoping to find a road or a house where we could get help. Hours passed, and we were exhausted and hungry. Just when we were about to give up, we saw a dirt road ahead. We followed it and eventually came to a small farmhouse. The people there were kind and let us use their phone. We called for a tow truck and waited there until it arrived. The tow truck driver took us back to our car and fixed it up. We didn't mention the house or the old woman. We just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. We finally made it to the family reunion, but we didn't talk about what happened. It felt too surreal, too terrifying. Megan and I never took that route again. The power went out around 9 p.m. I was home alone, just settling in for the night. I lit a few candles and tried to relax, but the silence felt thick. Every little noise seemed louder in the darkness. I decided to get my flashlight from the drawer in the kitchen. As I made my way through the living room, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. My heart skipped a beat. I hoped it was just a neighbor, but the footsteps stopped right in front of my door. Then came the knocking. It was frantic, almost desperate. My stomach tightened. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no answer, just more knocking. I felt a chill run down my spine. The knocking turned into pounding, and I could hear someone jiggling the doorknob. I knew I had to act fast. I moved as quietly as I could to the door and double-checked the lock. It was secure, but I knew it wouldn't hold if someone really wanted to get in. I needed something to barricade the door. My mind raced as I tried to think of what I could use. The sofa was too heavy, and the dining chairs seemed too flimsy. The pounding on the door grew louder, more insistent. I grabbed the nearest chair and wedged it under the doorknob. It wasn't much, but it was something. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed to find a place to hide. I made my way to the bedroom, keeping my steps as quiet as possible. I felt my way along the wall, my flashlight still in the kitchen where I'd left it. I cursed under my breath for not grabbing it sooner. The darkness was oppressive, and I felt vulnerable. In the bedroom, I closed the door softly behind me and locked it. I went to the window, thinking I might signal for help, but the blackout had plunged the whole city into darkness. There was no one outside, no lights, no movement. Just an eerie stillness. The pounding at the front door stopped suddenly. I strained my ears, listening for any sound. Then I heard footsteps again, moving away from my apartment. I breathed a small sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. The footsteps returned, stopping at my bedroom door. A new wave of fear washed over me. I could hear breathing on the other side of the door, heavy and ragged. The doorknob turned slowly, but the lock held. I backed away, my mind racing. I needed a weapon. Something to defend myself. I grabbed a heavy lamp from the bedside table and held it tightly, my hands trembling. The person on the other side of the door started pounding again, shouting something I couldn't make out. It sounded angry, desperate. I prayed the door would hold. I looked around the room, trying to think of an escape route. The window was the only option, but I was on the 5th floor. There was no fire escape, no way down. I felt trapped, like a cornered animal. I had to stay calm, think clearly. The pounding continued, relentless. I knew the door wouldn't hold forever. I moved to the closet, thinking I might hide inside. But it felt too obvious, too confined. I needed to be able to move, to defend myself if it came to that. Then, the pounding stopped again. Silence. I held my breath, waiting. The silence stretched on, unbearable. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud in my ears. I crept closer to the door, trying to listen for any sign of movement. Suddenly, I heard a crash from the living room. The sound of breaking glass. My heart leaped into my throat. They were inside. I tightened my grip on the lamp, ready to swing if I had to. I heard footsteps again, moving through the apartment, searching. The footsteps came closer, stopping right outside the bedroom door. The doorknob turned again, more forcefully this time. The door shuddered under the pressure, but the lock held. I prayed it would keep holding. I needed a plan, something to get me out of this. Then, an idea came to me. I remembered the fire escape ladder in the hallway outside my apartment. If I could get out there, I might have a chance. But I had to get past whoever was trying to break in. It was risky, but I didn't have a choice. I took a deep breath and unlocked the bedroom door. I flung it open, swinging the lamp at the figure standing there. I heard a grunt of pain as the lamp connected, and I didn't wait to see who it was. I ran for the front door, my heart pounding. I threw the chair aside and yanked the door open. I sprinted down the hallway to the fire escape ladder. My hands fumbled with the latch, my mind screaming at me to hurry. I could hear footsteps behind me, getting closer. Finally, the latch gave way, and I pulled the ladder down. I climbed as fast as I could, my muscles burning with the effort. I didn't look back, didn't want to see how close they were. I just kept climbing, higher and higher. When I reached the roof, I ran to the edge, looking for a way down. There was another ladder leading to the ground, and I didn't hesitate. I climbed down, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. I felt a surge of relief as I reached the ground. I ran to the nearest building, pounding on the door, shouting for help. Lights flickered on inside, and I heard someone moving. The door opened, and a man looked at me with concern. I told him what had happened, and he called the police. The police arrived quickly, and I told them everything. They searched my apartment but didn't find anyone. They said the person must have escaped when I climbed the fire escape. They assured me they would investigate, but I knew I wouldn't feel safe there again. I packed a bag and stayed with a friend for a while. The memory of that night haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Last month, I stayed at a small hotel while on a business trip. I was exhausted from a long day and just wanted to relax. When I got to my room, there was a package outside my door. It was addressed to someone else, but the name on the label didn't match anyone I knew. I called the front desk and told them about the package. They said they would look into it and just to leave it where it was for now. I didn't think much of it and went about my evening. Later that night, I decided to check the package out of curiosity. It was a plain brown box with no return address. I opened it, expecting to find something boring, but instead, there were documents inside. As I flipped through them, I realized they were filled with sensitive information, contracts, legal documents, and some handwritten notes that made no sense to me. The more I read, the clearer it became that these documents were important and potentially dangerous. I decided to take the package back to the front desk first thing in the morning. I put everything back in the box and set it aside. That night, I had trouble sleeping, uneasy about the contents of the package. The next morning, I went down to the lobby. The front desk was bustling with activity, but no one seemed to take notice of me at first. I finally got the attention of a young woman working there and explained the situation. She looked at the package and seemed puzzled. "I'll take care of it," she said, but her voice had a nervous edge. I went about my day, thinking little more of it. That evening, as I returned to the hotel, I noticed something odd. There was a man lingering near the entrance, looking around as if he was waiting for someone. I thought nothing of it and went inside. When I got to my room, I noticed a few missed calls on my phone. They were from an unknown number. I dismissed them and went to bed. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a loud knock on my door. My heart raced as I got out of bed and looked through the peephole. I saw the same man from earlier standing outside, his face hidden in the shadows. I didn't open the door. I quietly picked up my phone and called the front desk. No one answered. I was starting to panic. The knocking continued, louder and more insistent. I decided to call 911. As I was dialing, I heard a loud crash from the hallway, like something heavy being thrown. I hung up and ducked down behind the bed, hoping the intruder wouldn't hear me. I could hear footsteps approaching my door. They stopped right outside, and I held my breath, hoping they would just leave. The door handle rattled, but it didn't open. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps receded. I waited a few more minutes before daring to peek out. The hallway was quiet again. I quickly grabbed my things, went to the window, and climbed out onto the fire escape. It was raining heavily, and I was soaked in seconds, but I didn't care. I needed to get out of there. I made my way down the fire escape, and as soon as I hit the ground, I ran to the nearest street and called a cab. I told the driver to take me to a nearby police station. I explained everything to the officers there, and they promised to look into it. They said it was good that I left the hotel. They had received reports of a possible threat to my safety. After everything, I never went back to that hotel, and I'm still not sure what was in those documents or why they were so important. I moved to a new place and stayed cautious. The whole ordeal made me realize how dangerous situations can escalate quickly, especially when dealing with things that don't seem right. I had gone to the mall that day to pick up a few things, nothing out of the ordinary. I wasn't in a rush, just taking my time, browsing a bit. It was a weekday, so the mall wasn't too crowded. After about an hour, I started feeling the urge to use the restroom, so I headed to the nearest one. The restroom was quiet, which wasn't surprising since the mall itself wasn't busy. I walked in, picked the last stall, and locked the door behind me. I was just going through the motions, not really thinking about anything except how I had to stop at one more store before heading home. As I sat there, I heard the door to the restroom open again. Two men walked in, which was strange, but I figured maybe they'd wandered in by mistake or were mall staff. I stayed quiet, hoping they'd leave quickly, but they didn't. One of them said something in a low voice, and I couldn't make out the words at first. But then the other one responded, and his voice was clearer. They were talking about a car, mentioning a silver sedan parked on the lower level near the back entrance. My heart skipped a beat because that was where I'd parked my car, a silver sedan in that exact spot. I leaned forward slightly, trying to hear better, hoping I was wrong, that it was just a coincidence. But then they started describing the car in more detail, talking about the bumper sticker I had on the back, the one with a small dent near the left taillight. That was my car. There was no mistake. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I tried to stay calm. I knew I couldn't make a sound. If they knew I was in there, I didn't know what they might do. I strained to hear more, praying they wouldn't notice me. One of the men mentioned a woman, describing her hair color, her height, the clothes she was wearing. My heart pounded harder because they were describing me down to the black jacket I had on and the white sneakers I wore that day. It wasn't just about my car anymore. They were talking about me. The other man asked if they were sure she was alone, and the first one said he'd been watching her and hadn't seen anyone else with her. He said they'd wait until she got back to her car, then grab her before she could leave the parking lot. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My stomach churned with fear, and I felt like I might be sick. I stayed as still as possible, not daring to even breathe too loudly. They talked about how they'd follow me out, one staying close behind, the other going ahead to the car. They were calm, methodical, like they'd done this before. One of them asked how they'd deal with any cameras, and the other laughed, saying they knew how to avoid them, how to stay out of sight until the last second. I knew then that this wasn't just some random plan they'd come up with on a whim. They were serious, and they were ready. I realized I had to get out of there, but I couldn't just walk out. They'd see me, and there was no telling what they'd do. I waited, barely breathing, hoping they'd leave soon. They kept talking, going over their plan, making sure they had everything covered. Finally, after what felt like forever, they agreed on a meeting spot and decided to head out. I heard the door open, and I counted the seconds as it closed behind them. My legs felt numb, and I didn't trust them to hold me up if I tried to stand. I stayed in the stall for a few more minutes, making sure they were really gone. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. I knew I couldn't go back to my car. They'd be waiting for me. I couldn't call out for help either. What if they were still nearby? When I finally felt like I could move, I slowly unlocked the stall and stepped out. The restroom was empty, and the silence was almost as terrifying as what I'd just heard. I went to the sink, splashed cold water on my face, and tried to steady my shaking hands. I knew I had to get help, but I didn't want to risk walking through the mall and running into them. I left the restroom as quietly as I could and took the nearest exit that led to the mall offices. I found a security guard and told him everything, trying not to break down in front of him. He called for backup, and they walked me to a different exit, taking a route that avoided the parking lot. The police were called, and I gave them a description of the men, what I'd heard, everything I could remember. They went to check the parking lot, but the men were gone, and so was my car. The police found it later, abandoned a few miles away. I was driving back from a late night out with a few friends, and I wasn't paying too much attention to where I was going. I'd been to my buddy's place 100 times, but I guess I was more tired than I thought. The houses in his neighborhood all looked pretty similar, especially in the dark. I pulled up, parked, and got out, thinking I was at his place. The porch light was off, which I thought was strange because he usually left it on for me. But I figured he must have gone to bed early. I walked up to the door, trying to be quiet so I wouldn't wake him or his roommates. The door was unlocked, which wasn't too unusual, so I pushed it open and stepped inside. As soon as I walked in, I knew something was off. The place smelled different, like cigarettes and something else I couldn't place. I looked around, and the furniture was all wrong, too. But I didn't really think much of it at first, just thought maybe he'd rearranged or something. I was tired, my brain wasn't firing on all cylinders. I called out his name, but no one answered. The place was dead quiet. That's when I noticed a faint light coming from under a door at the end of the hall. It looked like the light from a TV, flickering. I figured he must have fallen asleep watching something, so I walked over and knocked lightly. No response. I knocked again, louder this time, and still nothing. I was about to turn around and leave, thinking maybe I'd made a mistake, but then I heard a noise behind the door. It was a creak, like someone shifting their weight on an old floorboard. My heart started pounding, but I couldn't figure out why I was so nervous. I pushed the door open slowly, just a crack, and peeked inside. The room was dim, lit only by the blue glow of the TV. But there was someone in the chair, sitting with their back to me. I couldn't see their face, but something about the way they were sitting, so still, sent a chill down my spine. I whispered my buddy's name, but the person didn't move. I was about to reach out, maybe tap them on the shoulder, when the person suddenly turned around, and I saw his face. It wasn't my friend. This guy had wild eyes, and his face was twisted with fear. He jumped up from the chair, and for a second, we just stared at each other, both of us frozen. Then he lunged at me, grabbing me by the collar and shoving me against the wall. "Who sent you?" he hissed, his breath hot and reeking of alcohol. His grip was strong, and I could feel my legs shaking. I stammered, trying to explain that I was in the wrong house, that I thought this was my friend's place, but he wasn't listening. His eyes were darting around, paranoid, like he was trying to figure out what to do with me. "You think I'm stupid?" he growled. "You think I don't know what's going on? You're here to finish me off, aren't you?" My mind was racing, and I was trying to find a way out of this, trying to make him understand that this was all a huge mistake. But he wasn't listening. He pulled me further into the room, shoving me down onto a chair, and started pacing back and forth, muttering to himself. I kept telling him I didn't know what he was talking about, that I was just trying to get to my friend's house, but he wouldn't believe me. He kept saying things like, "They're always watching, and I knew they'd come for me." There was a gun on the table, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. It was just sitting there, within reach, but I didn't dare make a move for it. I didn't know what this guy was capable of, but I could tell he was unhinged. He suddenly stopped pacing and turned to face me, his eyes narrowing. "You're lying," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But it doesn't matter. I'm not going down without a fight." He reached for the gun, and my heart nearly stopped. I thought that was it, that he was going to shoot me right there. But instead, he walked over to the window and started peering out, like he was expecting someone to show up. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there and wait for whatever he was planning. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a way to get out of there alive. I noticed that his attention was fully on the window, so I slowly started to inch my way toward the door. My movements were slow, deliberate, trying not to make any noise. But the floor creaked and his head snapped around, eyes locking onto mine. "You're not going anywhere," he said, pointing the gun at me now. "Sit down." I froze, not daring to move. But just as I was about to sit back down, we both heard a car pulling up outside. His eyes widened, and he turned back to the window, gun still in hand. I took the chance. I bolted for the door, my heart hammering in my chest. I heard him shout, and a shot rang out, the sound deafening in the small house. I didn't stop. I just kept running, out the front door, down the steps, and into the street. I didn't look back. I didn't even think about my car, just kept running until I was far enough away that I felt like I could breathe again. I finally stopped, leaning against a tree, my whole body shaking. I pulled out my phone and called the police, barely able to get the words out. They found the house and the guy, but by then he was gone. They said it looked like he packed up in a hurry and left. I don't know who he was, what he was involved in, or who he thought I was, but I'm just grateful I got out of there alive. I don't think I'll ever forget the look in his eyes, though, or how close I came to not making it out of that house. It was all just a mistake, but it was a mistake that could have cost me everything. I had just come home from work, exhausted as usual. It was late, and the city outside my apartment was buzzing with its usual noise. I kicked off my shoes and threw my bag on the couch, ready to unwind. My apartment wasn't much, small, cramped even, but it was mine. I felt safe there, or at least I used to. I was in the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge for something to eat when I heard a knock at the door. It was strange because I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was too late for deliveries. I hesitated for a moment, then went to the door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a man standing there in a delivery uniform. He was holding a package, something small, wrapped in brown paper. I didn't recognize him, but he looked official enough. Maybe it was something from work, or a mistake. Either way, I figured I should at least check. I opened the door just a crack, enough to talk but not enough for him to see much inside. "Can I help you?" I asked. The man smiled, but there was something off about it. His eyes didn't match the expression on his face. "Delivery for you," he said, holding out the package. I looked at it, then back at him. "I didn't order anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was about to close the door, thinking it was some mix-up, but before I could, he pushed against it, forcing his way inside. I stumbled back, too shocked to react at first. He was in my apartment now, closing the door behind him and locking it. My heart was pounding, and I felt frozen, unable to move as he stood there, staring at me with a grin that sent chills down my spine. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice calm, too calm. "You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this." Panic hit me all at once, and I started to back away, trying to put some distance between us. But the apartment was small, and there wasn't much space to go. He took a step forward, and I realized I needed to do something, anything, to get out of this. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he just looked around my apartment like he was making himself at home. "You," he finally said. "I've been watching you for weeks, learning everything about you. I know your routines, your habits, where you go, who you talk to. And now, I'm finally here." I could feel my stomach turn as he spoke. This wasn't random, it wasn't a mistake. He had planned this, waited for the right moment to strike. And now, I was trapped in my own home with him. He moved closer, and I knew I had to act fast. I glanced at the kitchen, where my phone was charging on the counter. If I could just reach it, maybe I could call for help. But he was between me and the kitchen, and there was no way I could get past him without him stopping me. I noticed the knife block on the counter, just a few feet away. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I could feel him getting closer, his presence suffocating. In a split second, I made a decision. I darted toward the kitchen, reaching for the knives. But he was faster than I expected. He grabbed my arm, yanking me back and slamming me into the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I struggled to catch my breath. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his grip tightening. I could feel the desperation rising in me, but I forced myself to stay calm, to think. I looked up at him, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes, something unhinged, like he wasn't all there. He was talking, but I wasn't really listening anymore. My mind was focused on survival, on finding a way out. With all the strength I could muster, I twisted my body, trying to break free from his grip. I managed to get one arm free and reached for the nearest knife. My fingers closed around the handle, and without thinking, I swung it toward him. The knife grazed his arm, and he let out a shout of pain, letting go of me just enough for me to pull away. I didn't wait for him to recover. I bolted for the door, fumbling with the lock, my hands shaking. I could hear him behind me, but I didn't look back. I threw the door open and ran out into the hallway, screaming for help. My neighbors started opening their doors, and I didn't stop running until I was outside the building, where I finally collapsed on the sidewalk, gasping for air. People were gathering around, asking what happened, but all I could think about was that I was safe, that I had gotten away. Someone called the police, and they arrived quickly, swarming the building. They found him still inside my apartment, bleeding from the cut on his arm, but otherwise unharmed. The officers told me later that he had been stalking me for weeks, just like he said. They found pictures of me, notes about my schedule, even some of my things that had gone missing over the past few days. He had been planning this, waiting for the right moment. I moved out of that apartment the next day, left the city altogether. I couldn't stay there, not after what happened. I'm still trying to process it all, to understand how someone could do something like that. I was new in town, having just moved into a small, quiet neighborhood in Iowa. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone. My nearest neighbor was an older man named Ed, who lived alone in a big, creaky house next door. He seemed friendly enough, always waving when I passed by, so when he invited me over for dinner one evening, I figured it'd be a good way to get to know him better. I didn't have many friends yet, so I agreed. When I got to his house, it was just before sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was cool. Ed greeted me at the door with a wide smile, and I couldn't help but feel at ease. His house smelled of something roasting in the oven, and the warmth inside was a nice break from the chilly air outside. We sat down in his dining room, which was a little too dim for my liking. The curtains were drawn, and the only light came from a single lamp on the table, casting long shadows across the room. But Ed was talking, telling stories about the town, about the people who lived there, and it helped me relax. He had a way of talking that drew you in, made you forget about everything else. Dinner was served roast beef, potatoes, and some kind of gravy. It looked good, smelled even better. As I ate, Ed kept pouring wine into my glass, insisting I drink up, enjoy myself. I noticed he wasn't drinking much himself, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe he just wasn't a heavy drinker. After a while, though, I started to feel strange. My head was buzzing, and my limbs felt heavy, like they were made of lead. I thought maybe I had too much to drink, but when I looked at my glass, it wasn't even empty. That's when I realized something wasn't right. Ed was still talking, but his voice sounded distant, muffled, like he was speaking through a thick wall. I tried to focus, to clear my head, but it only got worse. My vision started to blur, and I felt like I was sinking into the chair, unable to move. I glanced over at Ed, and that's when I noticed he was watching me closely, his smile fading into something else, something colder. His eyes were locked on me, unblinking, like he was waiting for something. I tried to stand up, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. It was like they'd forgotten how to move. I opened my mouth to say something, to ask for help, but the words wouldn't come out. My tongue felt thick, my throat dry. Ed leaned in closer, and I could feel his breath on my face. "You're not looking so good," he said, his voice calm, almost soothing. "Maybe you should lie down for a bit. I've got a room upstairs where you can rest." That's when it hit me. He had done something to me, drugged me, or maybe it was the wine. I wasn't sure, but I knew I needed to get out of there, and fast. But I couldn't move, couldn't even think straight. Panic started to set in, but it was like my mind was trapped in slow motion, unable to react. Ed stood up, and I could see him moving around the room, though everything was spinning now. He disappeared for a moment, then came back with something in his hand. I couldn't tell what it was, but the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. I was in serious trouble. I forced myself to concentrate, to push through the fog in my mind. With every ounce of strength I had left, I managed to slide my hand under the table, gripping the edge as I tried to pull myself up. My vision was fading, darkening around the edges, but I couldn't let myself black out. Not here, not with him. Ed must have seen me struggling because he hurried over, grabbing my arm. His grip was strong, too strong for someone his age. He tried to pull me up, but I twisted, using what little strength I had to push him away. He stumbled back, surprised, and for a moment, I thought I had a chance. I forced myself to stand, but my legs were shaky, barely holding me up. I took a step, then another, moving toward the door. Ed was behind me, and I could hear him cursing under his breath, his footsteps quickening as he came after me. I reached the door, fumbling with the handle, my fingers numb and clumsy. I managed to get it open just as Ed grabbed my shoulder, pulling me back. I swung around, trying to shake him off, and my vision blurred again, making everything spin. But somehow, I broke free, stumbling out into the hallway. I could hear Ed yelling something, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I ran, or at least I tried to, my feet dragging on the floor like they were made of stone. I made it to the front door, threw it open, and nearly fell down the steps. The cold night air hit me like a slap, waking me up just enough to keep going. I heard Ed behind me, his footsteps on the wooden porch, but I didn't look back. I don't know how I made it to the street, but somehow, I did. The houses around me were dark, quiet, and I could barely see straight. But I kept moving, one foot in front of the other, until I was far enough away from Ed's house that I couldn't hear him anymore. Eventually, I collapsed on the sidewalk, my body giving out. I must have passed out there because the next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital, with bright lights above me and nurses talking in hushed tones. They told me later that someone had found me and called for help. The doctor said I was lucky, that whatever Ed had given me could have killed me if I hadn't gotten out when I did. The police went to his house, but by the time they got there, he was gone. They found the dining room, the food still on the table, and some pills that he had probably put in my wine. I don't know what he planned to do if I hadn't escaped, and I try not to think about it too much. I was on a long drive through Florida, heading down to visit family. It was late, and I was exhausted, so I decided to stop at a roadside motel. It looked run down but decent enough for a few hours of sleep. The neon sign flickered, and the parking lot was mostly empty, just a few cars scattered around. I parked near the entrance and went inside. The lobby was small and dimly lit. There was a man behind the counter, probably in his late 50s, with a thin frame and greasy hair slicked back. He looked up when I walked in, smiling too widely, like he was forcing it. Something about the way his eyes followed me made me uncomfortable, but I brushed it off as him just being overly friendly. He asked for my ID and credit card, and I handed them over. While he was processing my payment, I noticed he kept glancing at me, not in a polite way, but like he was studying me. His hands were trembling slightly as he handed back my card, and I caught a glimpse of sweat on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. He gave me a room key and told me it was at the end of the hall, last room on the left. I thanked him and headed down the corridor. The hallway was narrow and smelled musty, like old carpet and stale air. The lights flickered a bit, adding to the uneasy feeling growing in my gut. I found the room and unlocked the door. It was small, with a single bed, a nightstand, and a TV mounted on the wall. The decor was outdated, the wallpaper peeling at the edges, but it was clean enough. I threw my bag on the bed and locked the door behind me. I took a quick shower to wash off the road grime and changed into some comfortable clothes. As I was drying my hair, I noticed something odd, a small red light blinking near the TV. I walked over to it and saw that it was coming from a tiny hole in the wall, just above the TV. My heart skipped a beat as I leaned in closer. There was a camera, barely visible, but definitely there. Panic washed over me, and I quickly scanned the room. I found another one hidden in the smoke detector above the bed, and one more behind a vent cover in the bathroom. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't stay in that room, but the thought of confronting the clerk made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone, thinking about calling the police, but I hesitated. I didn't know what this guy was capable of, and if he found out I discovered the cameras, who knows what he might do. I decided to leave quietly, acting as if nothing was wrong. I packed up my things quickly but tried not to look rushed. My hands were shaking as I shoved my clothes back into my bag. Every little noise seemed amplified, the sound of my zipper, the creak of the floorboards, even my own breathing. I opened the door and peeked down the hallway. It was empty. I stepped out, leaving the door slightly ajar to avoid making too much noise. My heart was pounding in my chest as I made my way back to the lobby. I kept expecting him to appear out of nowhere, but the hallway remained silent. When I reached the lobby, the clerk was still there, sitting behind the counter, his eyes fixed on a small TV screen in front of him. He didn't notice me at first, but when I got closer, he looked up, surprised to see me with my bag. "Checking out already?" he asked, his voice strained. He tried to smile again, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. "Yeah," I lied, "something came up. I have to go." He stared at me for a moment, like he was trying to read my mind, then slowly nodded. "I'll just need to process your checkout," he said, turning back to his computer. I stood there, every muscle in my body tense, waiting for him to finish. As he typed, I noticed the small TV on the counter. My stomach turned as I realized it was displaying a live feed from the cameras in the rooms. I saw my own room, the bed I had just left, the bathroom. It was all there, right in front of him. He handed me a receipt, and I forced a smile as I took it. "Thanks," I muttered, turning quickly to leave. "Drive safe," he called after me, but there was something off in his tone, like a warning. I walked as calmly as I could to my car, but the second I was outside, I sprinted. I fumbled with my keys, finally unlocking the door and jumping inside. I locked the doors, started the engine, and sped out of the parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away from that place. I found a well-lit gas station and pulled over, trying to catch my breath. I called the police then, told them everything. They took my statement and said they'd send someone to check it out, but I never found out what happened after that. I didn't want to know. All I could think about was how many others he might have watched, how many others never realized they were being recorded. I never stayed at a roadside motel again. I don't even like driving at night anymore. Every time I pass by a place like that, I can't help but wonder what's really going on behind those closed doors. I drive for a rideshare company in Chicago, mostly late nights. It's a way to make some extra money, and I've always felt pretty safe. That night, though, changed everything. I got the ping around 11:30 p.m. It was in a quieter part of town, but nothing unusual. I pulled up to the pickup spot, and a man was waiting on the corner. He was average looking, mid-30s maybe, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. He got in the back, and I greeted him like I always do. He nodded but didn't say much, just gave me a quick hi and stared out the window. His destination was across town, so I settled in for a decent fare. The first few minutes were quiet. He didn't seem chatty, and I didn't push it. But then he started talking, and I wish he hadn't. At first, it was small talk, how long I've been driving, if I liked the job, stuff like that. I answered politely, keeping my eyes on the road. Then he asked if I ever had strange passengers. I laughed it off and told him I'd seen a few weird things, but nothing too bad. He just smiled, like he knew something I didn't. Ever wonder who gets in your car? He asked after a pause. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged. You never really know who they are, what they've done. I could feel him staring at the back of my head. It made my skin crawl, but I kept driving, hoping he'd drop it. He didn't. He started telling me about things he'd done. At first, it sounded like he was just messing around, talking about breaking into houses when he was younger, stealing cars, stuff like that. But the way he spoke, calm, like he was talking about the weather, put me on edge. He wasn't bragging, just stating facts, and that made it worse. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. You know, I've never been caught. Not once. People think they're safe, but they have no idea. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He was smiling, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile you see in movies, the one the killer gives right before something terrible happens. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I forced myself to stay calm. Guess you've been lucky, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He just chuckled, and I swear I could feel the temperature drop in the car. He started describing how easy it was to take someone's life. How most people don't fight back, how they just accept it. He talked about the thrill of it, how it made him feel alive. I didn't want to believe him, but the way he spoke, so detailed, so sure of himself, it was like he'd done it 100 times before. I tried to think of a way out, but we were on a long stretch of road with no traffic, no lights, nothing. Just me and him, and the darkness pressing in from all sides. I kept driving, hoping I could get to a busy street or somewhere with people, but it felt like the city was miles away. He leaned forward then, closer to my seat, and I felt his breath on the back of my neck. You ever wonder what it's like to kill someone? He whispered, like it was a secret between us. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he could hear it. I shook my head, trying to act normal, but inside I was screaming. No, I've never thought about it, I said, my voice shaky. He leaned back, still smiling, and stared out the window again. That's too bad. You might have to someday. I didn't know what he meant by that, and I didn't want to find out. I spotted a gas station up ahead, lit up like a beacon in the darkness. I told him I needed to stop for gas, even though I had more than enough to get to his destination. He didn't object, just nodded and kept staring out the window. I pulled into the station, my mind racing. I was terrified, but I couldn't let him see that. I told him I'd be right back, and he just waved me off, like he didn't care. I got out of the car, walked around to the front, and pretended to start pumping gas. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the nozzle. I knew I couldn't go back into that car, not with him in it. I glanced at the station's convenience store, thinking about running inside, but I didn't want to leave him alone in my car. What if he followed me, or worse, decided to wait for the next driver. I took a deep breath and walked inside the store, my mind spinning. The clerk looked up when I entered, and I tried to act normal, but I knew I looked terrified. I asked for the bathroom key, and he handed it to me without a word. Once inside the bathroom, I locked the door and pulled out my phone. I dialed 911, whispering to the operator that I needed help. I gave them the location, told them about the man in my car, and begged them to hurry. The few minutes I spent in that bathroom felt like hours. I kept picturing him getting out of the car, coming inside, finding me. I couldn't stop shaking, my mind running through every possible scenario, none of them good. Finally, I heard sirens. I peeked out the bathroom window and saw a police car pulling into the station. Relief washed over me, but I didn't leave the bathroom until I was sure the cops had the guy. They pulled him out of my car, cuffed him, and put him in the back of their cruiser. He didn't resist, didn't even say anything, just stared at me through the window with that same chilling smile. The police questioned me, asked what he'd said, and I told them everything. They wouldn't tell me much, just that they'd been looking for him for a while. Apparently, I'd picked up a wanted man, someone who'd been linked to multiple disappearances, but they'd never had enough evidence to arrest him. Until now. They let me go after a while, told me I was lucky to be alive. I drove home in a daze, barely able to focus on the road. I kept replaying the night over and over in my head, trying to figure out what I could have done differently, how I managed to get out of that situation alive. I stopped driving for the rideshare company after that. I couldn't do it anymore, couldn't shake the feeling that the next passenger might be just like him. It started with a friend request from someone named Sarah Adams. The name didn't ring any bells at first, but her profile picture looked familiar. I thought maybe we had gone to high school together. I didn't think much of it, really. People from the past pop up on social media all the time, right? I accepted the request, thinking maybe we'd catch up, talk about the good old days. A few minutes later, she sent me a message. "Hey, it's been so long. How have you been?" she wrote. I replied, telling her I was doing fine, asking her where she's been all these years. She said she moved away after graduation and had just come back to town. The conversation seemed normal at first, just basic small talk. But then she started asking about my life now, where I was living, what I was doing for work, even what gym I went to. It felt a bit strange, but I brushed it off. Maybe she was just curious. A few days later, I got another message from her, only this time it wasn't so friendly. "You were at the gym yesterday at 6 p.m., right? I saw you." My stomach dropped. How could she know that? I hadn't mentioned my workout schedule to her or posted anything about it online. I didn't reply, hoping it was just a weird coincidence. But then the messages kept coming. "You're looking good in that red jacket you wore to the store today," she wrote another time. That's when I really started to panic. I had worn a red jacket that day, but I hadn't seen anyone who looked like her. Was she watching me? The messages got worse. She started mentioning places I'd been, times I'd gone out, even what I had for lunch one day. It was like she was following me, but I never saw her. Every time I thought I might catch a glimpse of someone watching, there was no one there. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was some sick joke, but the messages became more personal, more threatening. "You look so peaceful when you're asleep," she wrote one night. That one made me feel like my heart stopped. I hadn't told anyone where I lived, let alone given her my address. How did she know where I lived? I started feeling paranoid, like I was being watched all the time. I glance over my shoulder walking to my car, check behind me in the store, even look out my windows at night. But I never saw anything, never found anyone following me. One night, I got a message that sent me over the edge. You should lock your doors better. I was inside today. I couldn't breathe. I ran to my front door, checking the lock, but it was secure. Then I checked the windows, the back door, but everything was locked up tight. But still, how could she know my address, let alone get inside? I called the police, but they didn't take it seriously. They told me it was probably someone messing with me, that there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I block her and make my profile private, but that didn't feel like enough. I blocked her, set all my social media accounts to private, but the messages didn't stop. They just started coming from different accounts. Each one had a new name, a different profile picture, but I knew it was her. The messages were the same, the details about my life too specific to be anyone else. Then one night, I heard footsteps outside my window. My heart was pounding so loud I thought I might pass out. I crept to the window, peeking out from behind the curtain, but I didn't see anything. Still, I was too scared to sleep that night. Every creak, every little noise made me jump. The next day, I found a note taped to my front door. It was just a piece of paper with one word written on it: soon. That was it. No explanation, no signature, just that one word. I wanted to scream, to cry, but I was too scared to do anything. I didn't even want to go inside, but I couldn't stay outside either. I felt trapped. I decided to stay at a friend's house for a few days, but even that didn't help. The messages followed me there too. She knew where I was, what I was doing. Nice try, but you can't hide from me, she wrote. My friend tried to comfort me, told me it was just someone trying to scare me, but I could tell she was scared too. After a few days, I couldn't take it anymore. I went back to the police, begging them to do something. They took me a little more seriously this time, but they still didn't have any leads. They suggested I get a security system, but that felt like a small comfort compared to what I was dealing with. I installed cameras around my house, set up alarms, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that she was out there, watching. Every time I went out, I felt like I was being followed. Every time I came home, I expected to find her waiting for me. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the messages stopped. Days went by, then weeks, and there was nothing. I didn't know whether to be relieved or more scared. Maybe she was done with me, or maybe she was just waiting for the right moment. I moved to a new place, changed my phone number, even deleted my social media accounts, but I still couldn't shake the fear. I kept looking over my shoulder, kept expecting to see her standing there, watching me with that cold smile. It's been months now, and I haven't heard from her again. But I still can't sleep right. I still check my windows and doors every night, still jump at every little noise. I don't think I'll ever feel safe again, not really. I don't know who she was, or why she picked me, but I know she's out there somewhere. Maybe she's doing this to someone else now, or maybe she's just waiting for the right moment to come back. I don't think I'll ever know for sure, and that's what scares me the most. I rented a small beach house on the Oregon coast, looking forward to a quiet getaway. It was one of those places tucked away from the main road, with the sound of the waves crashing in the background. The realtor mentioned it had been vacant for a while, which I didn't mind. I wanted peace, and the idea of having the house to myself was perfect. The first day went fine. I walked along the beach, had some coffee, and took in the view. The house was cozy, with old furniture and creaky wooden floors. It had that musty smell you get from places that haven't been lived in for a while, but I liked it. It felt like stepping back in time. That night, I settled into the living room with a book. I could hear the wind picking up outside, making the windows rattle a bit. The only other sound was the distant roar of the ocean. It was peaceful, just what I needed after the stress of work. But then, around midnight, I heard something above me, a faint thud coming from the attic. At first, I thought it was just the owls settling or maybe an animal. But the noise came again, a slow, deliberate sound like someone was moving something heavy. It was odd, but I tried to ignore it. I convinced myself it was nothing and went to bed. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I checked the attic door, which was in the hallway. It was one of those old pull-down ladders, and it didn't look like it had been touched in years. Dust covered the handle, and the wood was worn, but there were faint marks on the floor, like something had been dragged. I brushed it off, figuring it was my imagination, and went about my day. But the sound came again that night, louder this time. It was like someone was pacing back and forth right above me. I sat there, staring up at the ceiling, listening. It wasn't just the owls settling. There was a rhythm to it, like footsteps. My heart started racing, but I couldn't bring myself to check the attic. I told myself I was being paranoid and tried to sleep, but I kept waking up, listening. By the third night, the noises had gotten worse. It wasn't just footsteps anymore. I heard what sounded like whispering, faint but unmistakable. The pacing had become more frantic, like whoever or whatever was up there was getting impatient. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Was it a squatter? A drifter who found the house empty and decided to stay? The thought of someone living above me without my knowing was terrifying. I finally decided to confront it. I couldn't live in fear, not knowing what was above me. So, I grabbed a flashlight and went to the attic door. My hand shook as I pulled down the ladder, the creaking echoing through the empty house. The air was thick with dust, and the smell was stronger, like something rotten had been left there for too long. I climbed the ladder slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The attic was pitch black, the kind of darkness that eats up the beam of a flashlight. I could barely see anything, just the outline of old boxes and furniture covered in sheets. But then, in the far corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a mattress, dirty and stained, pushed up against the wall. Next to it, there were cans of food, half-eaten, and a stack of clothes that weren't mine. Someone had been living up here, watching me, waiting for God knows what. The worst part was the notebook I found next to the mattress, filled with pages of notes. My name was written over and over, along with details about my day, what I ate, why I left the house, even what I was wearing. It was like reading the mind of a predator, someone who had been studying me, learning my habits. I was frozen with fear, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I heard it, the sound of the ladder creaking. I wasn't alone. Whoever had been staying here was coming back, and I was trapped. I turned off the flashlight and crouched behind some boxes, my breath shallow, trying to stay quiet. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like they knew I was there. I could hear the person moving through the attic, getting closer. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it would give me away. Then the footsteps stopped, right next to where I was hiding. I could feel the presence, the weight of their gaze, even though I couldn't see them. I didn't move. I barely breathed, praying they wouldn't find me. After what felt like hours, the footsteps started again, moving away. I waited until I was sure they were gone, then slowly crawled back to the ladder. I climbed down as quietly as I could, my whole body shaking. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for morning. As soon as the sun came up, I grabbed my things and left. I didn't bother telling the realtor what had happened. I just wanted to get out of there, as far away as possible. To this day, I don't know who was up there or what they wanted. I don't want to know. All I know is that someone was watching me, planning something, and I was lucky to get out when I did. I've been going to the same gym in Los Angeles for a couple of years now. It's nothing fancy, just a place close to work where I can clear my head after a long day. I usually go in the evenings, when it's not too crowded. I recognize most of the regulars by now, even if I don't know their names. You get used to seeing the same faces around. About a month ago, I started noticing a guy who seemed to be there almost every time I was. At first, I didn't think much of it. Lots of people go to the gym around the same time every day. But after a while, it felt like he was always nearby, watching me. Whenever I moved to a different machine, he wasn't far behind. He didn't seem to be doing much of his own workout, just kind of hanging around. I tried to brush it off as coincidence. Maybe he was new to the gym and didn't know what he was doing yet. But it kept happening. If I went to the bench press, he'd be there, just sitting on a nearby bench, not even lifting. If I switched to the treadmill, he'd get on the one right next to mine, even if there were plenty of others open. It was weird, but I didn't want to overreact. Then, last week, it got worse. I was in the locker room after my workout, grabbing my stuff, when I saw him out of the corner of my eye. He was just standing there, not changing or anything, just staring at me. It made my skin crawl. I avoided eye contact, threw on my clothes, and got out of there as quickly as I could. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. The next day, I decided to cut my workout short, just to avoid him. I thought if I left early, I might miss him altogether. But as I headed to my car, I saw him again, hanging around the entrance to the parking lot. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, like he was waiting for something. Or someone. My heart started pounding. I quickly got into my car, locking the doors as soon as I was inside. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I drove home, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see him following me. But the drive was uneventful, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd convinced myself I was just overthinking things. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about him, about the way he seemed to always be there, just watching me. I couldn't figure out what he wanted or why he was paying so much attention to me. I decided I'd change my routine, maybe go to the gym earlier in the day or switch to a different location altogether. The next day, I left work early and headed to the gym, hoping he wouldn't be there. I was relieved when I didn't see him. I had a decent workout, but I was still on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I left, I made sure to walk quickly to my car, my keys already in hand. I scanned the parking lot, but there was no sign of him. Feeling a bit more at ease, I drove home. But as I pulled onto my street, I saw a car parked a few houses down from mine. I didn't recognize it, but it was probably just a neighbor's friend or something. I parked in my driveway, grabbed my gym bag, and headed inside. It wasn't until I was locking my front door that I noticed the car had moved. It was now parked directly across the street from my house. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. It was the same guy. He was sitting in the driver's seat, staring right at me. My heart started racing again. I quickly shut the door and locked it, then peeked through the blinds. He hadn't moved. He was just sitting there, like he was waiting for something. I didn't know what to do. Calling the police seemed like an overreaction, but I couldn't just ignore this anymore. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed. But before I could hit call, there was a knock on the door. A slow, deliberate knock that sent chills down my spine. I didn't answer. I just stood there, staring at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Another knock, this time louder. He knew I was home. I could hear him breathing on the other side of the door, could feel the tension building in the air. Finally, I found my voice. "What do you want?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, then his voice came through, low and unsettling. "I just want to talk," he said. I didn't respond. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. There was no way I was letting him in. I heard him try the doorknob, but thankfully, it was locked. He jiggled it for a moment, then went silent. I crept back to the window, peeking through the blinds again. He was still there, now pacing back and forth on my porch. I felt trapped. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew it wasn't good. I thought about making a run for it, but where would I go? He'd see me leave, and who knew what he'd do then? The pacing stopped. I heard footsteps retreating down the porch steps, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe he was leaving. But then I heard a noise from the side of the house, near the kitchen window. He was trying to get in. I grabbed a kitchen knife, my hand shaking as I held it. I didn't want to use it, but I wasn't going to let him get to me without a fight. I heard the window creak, the sound of metal against metal as he tried to pry it open. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't give. Finally, the noise stopped. There was a long silence, and I dared to hope that he'd given up. But then I heard his voice again, this time right outside the window. "I know you're in there," he said, almost playfully. "Why don't you just let me in? We can talk." I didn't respond. I clutched the knife tighter, every muscle in my body tense. I could hear him breathing through the window, could feel his presence just on the other side. It was unbearable. Then, out of nowhere, there was a loud bang. I jumped, nearly dropping the knife. I couldn't tell where it came from, but it sounded close, like something had hit the side of the house. Then, another bang, this time louder. It sounded like he was trying to break the window. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran to the bedroom, locked the door, and dialed 911. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a few tries to get the number right. When the operator answered, I could barely get the words out. I told her what was happening, gave her my address, and she said officers were on the way. The banging continued, each one sending a jolt of fear through me. I pressed myself against the bedroom door, knife still in hand, waiting. It felt like hours before I heard the sirens, though it was probably only a few minutes. The banging stopped. I heard footsteps running away, followed by the sound of car doors slamming and an engine starting. I didn't move until I heard the police pounding on my front door, calling out to me. They searched the area, but he was gone. They found the car he'd been driving a few blocks away, but it was a rental, and there was no sign of him. I gave them a description, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. He was just an ordinary guy, someone who could blend in anywhere. The police told me to stay somewhere else for the night, so I did. I couldn't stay in that house, not after what happened. I don't think I'll ever feel safe there again. I still don't know why he was so obsessed with me, why he followed me home, why he tried to get into my house. The police haven't found him yet, and every time I hear a knock on the door or a car pull up outside, my heart skips a beat. I was driving home late one night on a back road in Kentucky. It was the kind of road where you don't see another car for miles, just trees on both sides and darkness stretching ahead. I had the radio on low, trying to keep myself awake. The road twisted and turned, and I was focused on the white lines, just trying to get home. It must have been close to midnight when I saw something up ahead. At first, I thought it was just another car, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't moving. The headlights were off, and the car was sitting sideways across the road. My heart started to race a little. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was an accident. When I got close enough to see, I noticed the front of the car was smashed in, like it had hit something. There was no other car around, though, and no sign of anyone inside. I pulled over to the side of the road, leaving my engine running, and grabbed my phone. I thought about calling 911, but something made me hesitate. I rolled down my window and listened. It was quiet, too quiet. I sat there for a moment, debating what to do. I didn't want to just drive away if someone was hurt, but the whole situation felt off. I was about to pull out and keep going when I saw movement near the car. A figure stepped out from behind it, stumbling like they were hurt. It looked like a woman, clutching her side. I felt a pang of guilt for not getting out sooner. I turned off my engine, grabbed my flashlight, and got out of the car. As soon as I stepped onto the road, I felt the chill in the air. I walked toward the wreck, keeping the light on the woman. "Are you okay?" I called out. My voice sounded shaky, even to me. She didn't answer, just kept stumbling toward me. I could hear her breathing, ragged and uneven. I quickened my pace, wanting to help, but something didn't feel right. When I got closer, I saw her face in the light. She wasn't hurt, at least not like I'd thought. Her expression was cold, almost blank, like she was just going through the motions. I stopped, suddenly unsure. That's when I noticed the others. 2 men stepped out from the trees on either side of the road. They were quiet, moving slowly toward me. I hadn't seen them before, and now they were closing in. My heart started pounding. I took a step back, but the woman kept coming. The men were getting closer too, and I realized they had something in their hands. I couldn't make out what it was, but the way they held them made my blood run cold. Panic set in. I turned and bolted back to my car. I heard footsteps behind me, quickening as I ran. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my keys trying to unlock the door. I got it open just as I felt one of them grab at my jacket. I yanked free, throwing myself into the driver's seat and slamming the door shut. I hit the locks just as they reached the car. The woman's face was right at my window, her hand smearing something dark against the glass. I didn't take the time to see what it was. I started the car and threw it into reverse, tires screeching as I backed away from them. The men pounded on the hood, shouting, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't care. I just wanted to get away. I slammed on the gas and spun the car around, the headlights catching their faces for a split second. The woman wasn't stumbling anymore. She was standing upright, watching me with those cold eyes. I sped down the road, heart racing, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, expecting to see them following me, but there was nothing. Just darkness. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station about 10 miles down the road. I pulled in, parked under the bright lights, and just sat there, trying to catch my breath. My hands were still shaking, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. After a while, I finally called 911. I told them about the accident, about the people who tried to grab me. The dispatcher sounded calm, said they'd send someone to check it out. But I could tell she didn't understand, didn't get how close I'd come to something terrible. I waited at that gas station until I saw the blue lights of a police car. The officer took my statement, asked a lot of questions, but I could tell he didn't believe me either. He kept asking if I was sure about what I saw, if maybe I was just tired or mistaken. But I knew what happened. I knew those people were out there, waiting for someone to fall into their trap. I never heard back from the police about it. I don't know if they found the car or those people. I don't think I want to know. I took a different route home that night, and I haven't driven down that road since. I checked into the hotel late in the afternoon. It was one of those old, charming places in Savannah, the kind you see in postcards. The kind of place that's supposed to have history, character. I thought it would be a nice change from the usual chain hotels I stay at for work. The lobby had this grand staircase, and the rooms had those old-style keys, not the plastic cards. I liked that. Made it feel special. My room was on the second floor, right next to the stairs. It was small but nice, with a big window overlooking the street. The bed had a canopy, and the furniture looked like it was from another century. It was quiet, too, which I liked. The only other room nearby was next door, 207, and it seemed empty when I got there. Later that evening, I went out to grab dinner at a nearby restaurant. When I got back, I noticed the door to 207 was slightly open. I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone had checked in while I was out. But as I walked past, I glanced inside. The lights were on, but the room was empty. No bags, no signs of anyone. Just an open door. I went to my room and tried to forget about it. I unpacked, watched some TV, and eventually went to bed. But around midnight, I heard something. It was faint at first, like someone talking. I got up and listened at the wall. It was coming from 207. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a woman's voice, talking low and fast, like she was scared or upset. I thought about knocking on the door, but I didn't want to intrude. I figured it wasn't my business. I tried to go back to sleep, but I kept hearing that voice. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, grabbed my key, and stepped into the hallway. When I got to 207, the door was closed again. I stood there for a second, listening. The voice had stopped, but I could still feel something off. I knocked lightly, just to check. There was no answer. I knocked again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. I started to walk away, but then I heard something, a thump, like something heavy falling. I froze. My hand was on the door handle before I realized what I was doing. I hesitated, then turned it slowly. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open, just a crack. The room was dark now, the lights off. I could barely see anything, just the outline of the furniture. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. I called out, softly, "Hello?" No response. I took another step, then stopped. Something didn't feel right. The air was thick, heavy, like there was someone else in the room. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged. I reached for the light switch on the wall, but before I could flip it, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. Just the open door and the dark hallway beyond. My mind was racing. I was sure I had heard someone. I wasn't imagining it. I backed out of the room, my hand shaking as I closed the door behind me. I hurried back to my room, locked the door, and sat on the bed, trying to calm down. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I considered calling the front desk, but what would I say? I heard a noise. The door was open. It all sounded so stupid in my head. I eventually fell asleep, but it wasn't restful. I kept waking up, convinced I was hearing things. In the morning, I went downstairs for breakfast. The lobby was quiet, just a few other guests milling around. I noticed a woman at the front desk, a new one. She didn't smile when I passed by, just watched me with a blank expression. I didn't see the woman from 207 at breakfast. I hadn't really seen her at all, come to think of it. I asked the front desk if they knew who was staying in that room, but the woman just stared at me, like she didn't understand the question. She finally said, "No one is staying there." I blinked, confused. I explained that I had heard someone in the room last night, that the door had been open. But she just shook her head. "You must be mistaken, sir. That room has been vacant for weeks." I didn't know what to say. I thanked her and went back to my room to pack. I couldn't stop thinking about it. If no one was in that room, then who had I heard? Who was talking, and why was the door open? I decided to do something stupid. I went back upstairs and knocked on the door of 207. Just once, to see if anyone answered. To my surprise, the door opened, just a crack, like it had been waiting for me. I pushed it open, and the room was exactly as it had been last night, dark, empty, cold. But something was different this time. There was a smell, faint but unmistakable, like bleach and something metallic. I stepped inside, my stomach turning. The bed was made, the furniture was in place, but there was something on the floor near the window, a dark stain, barely visible in the dim light. I knelt down, my heart racing, and touched it. It was sticky, fresh. Blood. I stood up quickly, my head spinning. I had to get out of there. As I turned to leave, I noticed something else. The closet door was ajar, and there was a bag inside, partly hidden by the hanging clothes. I pulled it out and unzipped it. Inside were clothes, a wallet, and a phone. All women's things. My mind was racing. I had to go to the police, tell them what I had found. But as I grabbed the bag, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate. They stopped right outside the door. I held my breath, my hand still clutching the bag. The doorknob turned slowly, and the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was the woman from the front desk. She was holding something in her hand, a key, and her expression was cold, calculated. Behind her, I saw two men in hotel uniforms, their faces blank, like they were waiting for something. Before I could react, the woman stepped inside, the men following close behind. They didn't say anything, just stared at me with those empty eyes. I backed up until I hit the wall, my heart pounding in my chest. I was trapped. The woman took a step closer, her voice low and steady. "You shouldn't have come back here," she said. I could see the men closing in from both sides, their eyes locked on me, like they were sizing me up. I had one chance, and I took it. I threw the bag at the woman and bolted for the door. I shoved past the men, knocking one of them off balance, and sprinted down the hallway. I didn't look back. I didn't stop running until I was outside, the sunlight blinding me as I burst out of the front doors. I jumped in my car, started it up, and sped away, my heart racing. I didn't stop until I was miles away, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel. I pulled over on the side of the road and just sat there, trying to catch my breath. I never went back to that hotel. I never reported what I saw. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I just wanted to forget. but I can't. I keep thinking about that woman in 207, the bag with her things, and the people who were waiting for me. I know I was lucky to get out alive, but I can't help but wonder what happened to the others, the ones who didn't. The ones who never left that hotel. I booked the Airbnb because it looked cozy, and the price was decent. It was in a quiet part of New Mexico, far from any big cities, which was exactly what I needed. I was planning to spend a few days there, just relaxing and getting away from everything. The picture showed a nice little house with a fenced yard and a big porch. It seemed perfect. When I arrived, everything looked just like the photos. The house was small but neat, with a rustic feel to it. The key was in the lockbox, just like the owner had said. I let myself in and walked around, checking out the place. The living room had a big couch and a TV, and the kitchen was fully stocked. The bedroom had a comfortable-looking bed with clean sheets. Everything seemed fine, normal. That first day was uneventful. I unpacked, made myself some dinner, and spent the evening watching TV. It was peaceful, and I was starting to feel like this trip was exactly what I needed. I went to bed early, looking forward to a good night's sleep. But that night, I heard something. It was a faint noise, like a door creaking. I sat up in bed, listening. It was quiet again, so I figured it was just the house settling. Old houses make noises, right? I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, I went out to explore the area. There were some hiking trails nearby, and I spent most of the day outside. When I got back, everything seemed normal at first. But then I noticed something strange. A couple of my things weren't where I left them. My toothbrush was on the counter instead of in the drawer, and my suitcase was slightly open. I knew I hadn't left them like that. I started to feel uneasy. I checked the doors and windows, but they were all locked. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was just being forgetful, that I had left things out without realizing it. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, the noises were louder. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. I got out of bed and crept to the door, my heart pounding. I listened, holding my breath. The sounds were coming from the living room. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, slowly opening the door. The living room was empty. Everything was in place, nothing seemed disturbed. But the back door was unlocked. I knew for a fact that I had locked it before going to bed. I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone had been in the house. I checked all the rooms, but there was no one there. The next day, I decided to leave, but then I thought maybe I was overreacting. I didn't want to ruin my trip over something that could be my imagination. So, I stayed, but I was on edge the whole time. That night, I decided to stay up and see if I could catch whoever was coming into the house. I turned off all the lights and waited in the dark, sitting in the living room with a kitchen knife in my hand. I felt ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really wrong. Around midnight, I heard the noise again, the same creaking sound. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I sat there, frozen, listening as the footsteps came closer. Then, they stopped. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. Suddenly, I noticed a small red light blinking from behind the bookshelf. I slowly walked over, trying not to make a sound. I moved a couple of books aside and found a small camera hidden in the corner, pointing right at the couch where I had been sitting. Panic set in. I quickly searched the room and found another camera hidden near the TV. My mind was racing. How long had they been watching me? I grabbed my phone and started to dial 911, but then I stopped. What if whoever was doing this was nearby? What if they were waiting for me to make a move? I decided to leave right then. I grabbed my bag and bolted out the front door, not bothering to lock it behind me. As I ran to my car, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a van parked down the street that I hadn't seen before, and as I got closer, I saw that there was someone sitting in the driver's seat, watching me. I didn't look back. I jumped in my car, started it, and sped off, my heart pounding. I drove straight to the nearest motel, not stopping until I was miles away. When I finally felt safe enough to stop, I pulled into the parking lot and called the police. They took my statement and said they would send someone to check out the house, but I never went back. I didn't want to know what they found. The whole experience left me shaken, paranoid. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was following me. I'll never know what the owner's intentions were or what could have happened if I had stayed. But one thing is for sure, I'll never trust those charming little places again. Some things are better left unknown. I had parked my car in the far corner of a nearly empty parking lot. It was late, around midnight, and I had been out for dinner with some old friends. The place was on the outskirts of town, and the lot was big, mostly filled during the day but deserted by night. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was quiet, and the sky was clear, with only the hum of the distant highway in the background. As I walked back to my car, I noticed two men standing near a sedan a few spaces down from mine. They were chatting, leaning against the car like they were waiting for someone. I didn't pay them much attention at first. But as I got closer, I noticed they weren't really talking to each other. They were watching me. I kept walking, trying to act normal. My car was in sight, just a few more steps. But one of the men, a tall guy with a baseball cap, called out to me. "Hey, buddy. Got a minute?" His voice was friendly enough, but something felt off. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. It felt too forced, too eager. I slowed down, but I didn't stop. "What's up?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. I wasn't in the mood for small talk, especially not with strangers in a dark, empty parking lot. The second guy, shorter and stockier, stepped forward. "We were just wondering if you could help us out," he said. He smiled, but his eyes didn't match the expression. They were cold, calculating. "Our car won't start. Think you could give us a hand?" I knew better than to get involved with strangers in a situation like this, but it was hard to just ignore them. I was raised to be polite, to help others out when I could. But something about the way they were both watching me, like they were sizing me up, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Sorry, I'm not really good with cars," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. I was close to my car now, close enough to make a dash for it if I needed to. "Maybe you should call a tow truck." They didn't like that answer. The tall guy's smile faded, replaced with a look of mild annoyance. "Come on, it's just a quick jump. Won't take more than a minute." The shorter guy moved a little closer, and I could see something in his hand, partially hidden behind his leg. It looked like a cloth, or maybe a rag. My heart started to pound. I knew I was in trouble. I tried to play it cool, though. Sorry, man, I really can't help. I gotta get home. I turned to unlock my car, but the tall guy suddenly grabbed my arm. His grip was strong, too strong. Come on, don't be like that, he said, his voice hardening. The friendly act was gone. I yanked my arm back, but he held on. Panic surged through me. I twisted and managed to pull free, but the other guy was already moving toward me, that cloth now clearly visible in his hand. I backed away, my mind racing. They weren't just trying to get help with their car. This was something else, something much worse. I said no. I shouted, louder than I intended. My voice echoed across the empty lot. I turned and bolted toward my car. My hands were shaking so bad that I fumbled with the keys. I could hear them behind me, their footsteps quickening. I finally got the key in the lock, swung the door open, and threw myself inside, slamming the door shut just as the taller guy reached me. He banged on the window, hard, his face twisted in anger. The shorter guy was right behind him, yanking at the door handle, which thankfully was locked. I didn't wait to see what they would do next. I jammed the key into the ignition, my heart in my throat, and turned it. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the car into reverse, flooring it. They jumped back as my car shot out of the parking space. I spun the wheel, tires screeching, and tore out of the lot as fast as I could. My hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, my eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. I could see them standing there, watching me speed away, their faces lit by my taillights. They didn't chase me, but that didn't stop the fear from gnawing at my gut. I didn't slow down until I was back on the main road, the lights of the town coming into view. My heart was still pounding, my skin clammy with sweat. I kept driving, not stopping until I was far from that parking lot, far from those men. I never found out who they were or what they wanted, but I didn't need to. I knew that whatever their plans were, they weren't good. I've never gone back to that part of town at night, and I never will. There are some things that just aren't worth risking, and your life is one of them. I was driving through Arkansas on my way to visit family. It was late, and I was tired, but I was determined to push through and get there by morning. The road was empty, and the sky was pitch black, no streetlights, just the occasional glow from my headlights on the pavement. After a while, I noticed my gas gauge was getting low, so I decided to stop at the next gas station. I finally saw a sign for a gas station a few miles ahead. The place looked run down, like it hadn't seen much business in years, but it was the only option around. I pulled in and parked beside one of the pumps. The place was quiet, not another soul in sight, just an old truck parked off to the side. I got out and started pumping gas, glancing around as I did. The air was thick, and the night was eerily still. After a minute, the door to the little convenience store creaked open, and an attendant came out. He was a tall, lanky man with a dirty baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He smiled at me, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It felt off, like it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Evening," he said, his voice rough. "Need any help?" I shook my head, trying to be polite but not too friendly. "Just getting some gas, thanks." He nodded, but he didn't leave. He just stood there, watching me. After a moment, he stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "How's your car running?" he asked. "Fine," I said, trying to keep my tone light. I didn't like the way he was looking at me, like he was sizing me up. No problems. He nodded again, but then he tilted his head, as if he was listening for something. Mind if I take a look under the hood? Just to be sure? I hesitated. There was something about his tone that set off alarm bells in my head, but I didn't want to be rude. I'm really in a hurry, I said, trying to sound casual. It'll only take a second, he insisted. Before I could say anything else, he was already walking around to the front of my car. He popped the hood and started fiddling with something. I couldn't see what he was doing, but my gut told me to stop him. Still, I just stood there, frozen. Looks like your radiator might be leaking a bit, he said after a moment. I'll tighten it up for you. I didn't know much about cars, so I just nodded, hoping he'd finish quickly. After a few more seconds, he slammed the hood shut and wiped his hands on a rag hanging from his pocket. There, all set, he said, giving me that strange smile again. Should be good to go. I mumbled a thank you, paid for my gas, and got back in the car as quickly as I could. The whole encounter left me feeling uneasy, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. I started the car and pulled out of the station, glancing in the rearview mirror as I did. The attendant was still standing there, watching me leave. I drove for a few miles, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. But then, out of nowhere, my car started sputtering. The engine made a choking noise, and I felt the car losing power. My heart sank. I pulled over to the side of the road and turned off the engine, trying to calm my nerves. I sat there for a moment, thinking about what to do. I was in the middle of nowhere, with no signal on my phone, and the nearest town was miles away. I decided to try starting the car again. Maybe it was just a fluke. But when I turned the key, the engine wouldn't turn over. It was dead. As I sat there, panic starting to creep in, I saw headlights in the distance. A truck was coming up behind me. My first thought was relief, maybe they could help. But as the truck got closer, I realized it was the same old truck that had been parked at the gas station. The truck slowed down as it approached, and then it stopped right behind my car. The same attendant from the gas station got out, his face hidden in the shadows. He walked up to my window, and I rolled it down just a crack, enough to talk but not enough for him to reach in. "Car trouble?" he asked, his tone way too casual. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yeah, it just died on me." He leaned in closer, peering through the window. "I can take a look if you want. Might just be a loose connection." Something in his voice sent chills down my spine. I shook my head. "No, that's okay. I'll call for help." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes glinting in the dark. Then he straightened up and shrugged. "Suit yourself. But you're a long way from anywhere out here. Could be hours before anyone comes by." He turned and walked back to his truck, but instead of leaving, he just sat there, his headlights illuminating the back of my car. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, trying to think of a way out. I couldn't stay there all night, but I didn't trust him at all. I waited, hoping he'd get bored and leave, but he didn't. He just sat there, the engine idling, the lights glaring. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to try the car one more time. I turned the key, and to my surprise, the engine sputtered to life. Without thinking, I threw the car into drive and sped off, not daring to look back. My heart was racing, and my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I just kept driving, hoping to put as much distance between me and that gas station as possible. But then, in my rearview mirror, I saw the truck's headlights. He was following me. Panic surged through me, and I pressed down harder on the gas, but my car wasn't handling well. It felt sluggish, like something was holding it back. I knew he had done something to it when he was under the hood. The road ahead was dark, with no other cars in sight. I could see the truck getting closer, the headlights growing brighter in my mirror. I needed to get away, but I didn't know how. There was no one around, no one to help. I spotted a turnoff up ahead, a narrow dirt road leading into the woods. Without thinking, I swerved onto it, hoping to lose him in the trees. The car bounced and jolted on the rough road, but I didn't slow down. I could still see the truck behind me, but the trees were thick, and I hoped they'd slow him down. The dirt road twisted and turned, and I took every curve as fast as I could, barely keeping the car on the road. The headlights behind me flickered through the trees, sometimes disappearing completely, but I knew he was still there. Then, suddenly, the road ended. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop in front of a thick line of trees. I was trapped. I threw the car into reverse, trying to back up, but the engine sputtered again and died. I was out of time. The truck was closing in, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I grabbed my phone, frantically trying to find a signal, but there was nothing. I was alone, with no way to call for help. I could hear the truck's engine now, rumbling closer. I knew I had to do something, so I grabbed the tire iron from the trunk and ran into the trees. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get away. The woods were thick, and I stumbled over roots and branches as I ran. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the underbrush, getting closer. My heart was pounding, and I was gasping for breath, but I kept running. I could see a faint light up ahead, maybe a clearing or a road, but I wasn't sure. Then I heard him, just a few yards behind me. "You can't run forever," he shouted, his voice echoing through the trees. I pushed myself harder, the light growing brighter. I burst into a small clearing, and to my relief, I saw a house in the distance. It was dark, but it was my only hope. I ran toward it, praying someone was home. I reached the porch and banged on the door, screaming for help. There was no answer, but I kept pounding, my voice hoarse from shouting. I could hear him coming, his footsteps crunching on the gravel. Then, to my shock, the door creaked open. A middle-aged woman stood there, looking confused and alarmed. "Please," I gasped, "someone's chasing me." She looked past me, and her eyes whitened. Without a word, she pulled me inside and slammed the door shut, locking it behind us. We stood there, both of us breathing hard, listening. The footsteps outside stopped, and everything went silent. After a few moments, the woman peeked through the window. "He's gone," she whispered, her voice trembling. I collapsed onto the floor, my whole body shaking. I was safe, but just barely. The woman offered me a glass of water, and I sat there, trying to calm down. I don't know what would have happened if she hadn't been there, but I don't like to think about it. I was on a hiking trip in Washington, trying to clear my head after a rough few weeks at work. I didn't have a plan, just picked a trail I'd never been on and started walking. It was supposed to be a simple hike, just a few hours in and out, but I ended up losing track of time. The sun was starting to set, and I realized I needed to head back to my car before it got too dark. I decided to take a shortcut through a smaller, less traveled trail I noticed on the way in. It wasn't on the map, but it seemed like it would shave off some time, and I was in a hurry. The trail was narrow, winding through dense trees that blocked out most of the remaining light. The deeper I went, the more uneasy I felt, but I kept telling myself it was just nerves. It was getting late, and I was alone in the woods. About 10 minutes into the shortcut, I heard voices ahead. At first, I thought it was just other hikers, but something about the tone of the conversation made me stop. The voices were low, urgent, almost like they were arguing. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tension in their voices was clear. I slowed down, trying to be as quiet as possible, and moved closer. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw them, 3 men standing in a small clearing. They didn't look like hikers. They were dressed in dark clothes, and one of them had a large duffel bag at his feet. The others were holding shovels, and the ground in front of them was freshly dug up. My heart started pounding in my chest. I must have stepped on a twig or something because one of them suddenly looked up in my direction. I froze, hoping the shadows would hide me, but it was too late. He saw me. His expression changed from surprise to something darker, more dangerous. He said something to the others, and they all turned to look at me. I didn't wait to see what they would do. I turned and started walking back the way I came, trying to stay calm. But I could hear them behind me, their footsteps quickening. They were following me. I picked up my pace, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had just seen. I didn't know what they were doing out there, but it wasn't good, and I knew I wasn't supposed to see it. The trail seemed narrower now, more overgrown. The branches scratched at my arms and face as I hurried through the trees. I could still hear them behind me, getting closer. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I knew I had to get out of there before they caught up. I started running, not caring about the noise anymore. My breath was coming in short, panic gasps, and my legs were burning from the effort, but I didn't stop. I could hear them running too, crashing through the underbrush, yelling at each other. They were angry, desperate. They didn't want me getting away. I spotted a fork in the trail up ahead, one path leading back to the main trail and the other deeper into the woods. I hesitated for just a second before veering off onto the main trail. I hoped it would lead me back to my car, but I wasn't sure. The trees were thicker here, and the trail was barely visible. I kept running, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. The men were still behind me, but they seemed to be falling back a bit. I wasn't sure if they were losing me or if they were just toying with me, letting me tire myself out before they caught up. The thought terrified me, and I pushed myself even harder. The trail started to slope downward, and I had to slow down to keep from tripping. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and rocks. My foot caught on something, and I went down hard, my knee slamming into the dirt. Pain shot through my leg, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I could hear them getting closer, their footsteps crunching on the gravel. I forced myself up, ignoring the pain, and started limping down the trail. My knee throbbed with every step, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let them catch me. The trees were thinning out, and I could see the faint glow of the setting sun through the branches. I was close to the edge of the forest, but I wasn't safe yet. I glanced over my shoulder and saw one of them just a few yards behind me. His face was twisted in anger, his eyes locked on me. He wasn't going to let me go. I pushed myself harder, running as fast as I could with my injured leg. The pain was intense, but adrenaline kept me going. I burst out of the trees and onto a dirt road. My car was just a few hundred feet away, parked at the edge of the road where I had left it that morning. I could see the trailhead sign up ahead. I was almost there. I could hear the man behind me, his footsteps pounding on the dirt. He was so close, I could feel his breath on my neck. I reached my car, fumbling for my keys as I yanked the door open. I threw myself inside, slammed the door, and locked it just as he reached the window. He pounded on the glass, his face twisted with rage. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it, the engine roaring to life. I didn't even look back as I slammed the car into gear and tore down the road, leaving the man standing there, his figure growing smaller in my rearview mirror. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, the sun fully set behind the mountains. My hands were shaking, and my knee was throbbing, but I didn't care. I was safe. I didn't know what I had stumbled upon out there in the woods, and I didn't want to know. All I knew was that I had gotten out alive, and that was all that mattered.